Weiwei had already lived through this era once before. Being sent to the countryside was supposed to bury her future. Instead, she found Shiwan, a husband who refused to abandon her. Now officials wanted their marriage destroyed to protect his political future. Her secret space could draw tools, records, livestock, and impossible future resources. A lottery booklet even exposed the man quietly engineering their forced divorce. Weiwei chose Shiwan, their unborn child, and the prosperous life they would build together. The countryside would become their starting ground, not their grave. The immediate crisis began after Weiwei returned home dusty from helping Xiaoming escape another family's abuse. Mother Hua praised her courage, but Weiwei could not stop thinking about the cadre school officials approaching their family. During dinner, she finally revealed that people were reopening questions surrounding Shiwan and the family's political background. Mother Hua reacted bitterly because the household had already endured repeated investigations after being sent away from the capital. Weiwei pressed for the truth about why the Hua family had been targeted so often, despite Shiwan's military record. Mother Hua explained that the eldest son's wife had been raised in their household after being rescued from a battlefield. The young woman was educated abroad, and her background became sensitive after the eldest Hua son later disappeared. Contrary to the rumor that she had died, the missing sister-in-law had vanished as well, under circumstances nobody could safely explain. Every new investigation, therefore, landed on Shiwan and his father, even though neither man had caused the original problem. Weiwei refused to blame the missing couple, believing two people who loved each other deeply might have been carrying out something important. She promised Mother Hua that the family would face whatever came together rather than sacrificing one another for convenience. Before the conversation could go further, two cadre school officials arrived at the house, carrying a notebook and a prepared line of questioning. Weiwei first assumed they wanted information about another family, but the officials immediately fixed on her own identity. They described her as the adopted daughter of a capitalist household and claimed that status was damaging Shiwan's future. Weiwei corrected them at once. She had not been adopted, because two babies had actually been switched at birth. She had already found her biological parents, ordinary villagers whose class background was far cleaner than the officials assumed. That answer visibly disrupted the visitors because their entire argument depended on Weiwei remaining tied to the wealthy Lin household. Instead of investigating the new fact, they kept insisting Shiwan was an exceptional soldier whose talent should not be wasted. Weiwei asked them to stop circling the issue and state exactly what they expected her to do for her husband. The answer finally came. Their committee believed divorce was the easiest way to separate Shiwan from a politically inconvenient wife. Mother Hua shot up in fury because the same system that once trapped Weiwei now wanted to discard her for paperwork. Weiwei pointed out the obvious contradiction. Her biological parents were poor peasants, so her current background created no political burden. The lead official ignored that logic and argued that an unmarried Shiwan would simply be easier for the cadre school to review. That made the real goal clear enough, and Weiwei ended the discussion rather than negotiating over the survival of her marriage. When the official called her selfish, Mother Hua grabbed a broom and demanded to know who gave strangers authority over their family. Weiwei picked up the fire poker and ordered both men out before their so-called assistance became a formal complaint. The visitors tried one softer argument, claiming two people who loved each other could help one another by separating temporarily. Weiwei rejected that twisted definition of loyalty because Shiwan had never asked her to leave and never would. She reasoned that if he had agreed to divorce, officials would have delivered a decision instead of pressuring her at night. To Weiwei, Shiwan's refusal to abandon his wife and child mattered more than any position the cadre school could offer him. She threatened to report the two men for entering a home of women and children after being repeatedly told to leave. That possibility finally frightened them enough to retreat, and Weiwei locked the gate behind them without another word. Mother Hua broke down after they left, terrified that political pressure might still separate the young couple despite everything they had survived. Weiwei held her and promised that she would find a solution before anyone could use Shiwan's career against their marriage. Once the household settled, Weiwei entered the private space that only she and Shiwan understood. She performed her monthly lottery without much excitement because the forced divorce scheme still occupied nearly every thought. This time, the reward was not food or clothing, but a strange booklet cataloging supporting characters connected to her life. Its pages listed backgrounds, motives, relationships, and future relevance for people Weiwei had already met and several she had not. When she reached Zhao Sushuya's entry, the booklet connected him directly to the pressure being placed on Shiwan. His interest in Weiwei had become the hidden motive behind the background review and the sudden recommendation that she divorce. That discovery transformed suspicion into proof and gave Weiwei a specific opponent instead of a faceless administrative problem. She slept only a few hours before riding at dawn toward Darong village, where her biological Chen family lived. Father Chen was feeding chickens when she arrived, and one frightened request for help immediately erased every trace of hesitation. Hearing Weiwei call him, Dad still moved the older man, because they had only recently recovered the daughter lost at birth. Inside, Weiwei explained how cadre officials had visited at night and tried to separate her from Shiwan using false background claims. Her brother Taijun slammed the table, furious that anyone would torment the couple after everything they had already endured. His wife Feng Hui joined the outrage, noting that even truly miserable marriages did not give strangers permission to order a divorce. Mother Chen decided the family would go personally and challenge anyone claiming their daughter came from a politically dangerous household. Father Chen borrowed a cart for his wife, and the entire family set out toward the cadre school before the morning grew old. Neighbors quickly learned why they were traveling together, turning one family's complaint into a public question about fairness and evidence. Weiwei also planned one quieter move. If they encountered Lin Xiaojiao, Taijun would loudly mention Zhao Shuya's presence nearby. Lin Xiaojiao's had pursued Zhao before, so Weiwei expected that name to pull her away from whatever trouble she might otherwise cause. The plan worked immediately when Lin Xiaojiao heard the conversation, broke from her companion, and hurried toward the cadre school. Taijun realized his sister had deliberately placed a distraction in Zhao's path before confronting the man responsible for Shiwan's confinement. Weiwei explained that Zhao had previously intervened when members of the Lin family bullied her, but she had never encouraged his attention. Feng Hui found the situation almost funny because Lin Xiaojiao had chased the same man whose interest had shifted elsewhere. Taijun worried that the woman might gain Zhao's protection, but Feng Hui pointed out that genuine affection would require no chasing. Weifei refused to waste more thought on their relationship, as long as neither Zhao nor Lin Xiaojiao interfered with her family. At the cadre school gate, a suspicious guard treated Weiwei like another admirer, trying to see the young political director. She ignored his sarcasm and shouted Zhao Shuya's name through the iron gate until the man himself came outside. Zhao's expression changed when he saw Weiwei, but his brief surprise disappeared once he noticed the entire Chen family behind her. Weiwei requested a public conversation rather than a private meeting because she wanted the false background claim corrected before witnesses. Once admitted, she raised her voice enough for nearby workers to hear exactly what cadre officials had demanded at her home. Weiwei stated that Shiwan's family's been investigated before their transfer, and her marriage had never caused that decision. More importantly, she introduced the Chen parents as proof that her present classification came from 3 generations of poor villagers. Zhao tried to promise another investigation, but Weiwei asked what remained to investigate when her biological parents were standing beside her. She even offered blood testing if the cadre school genuinely doubted the relationship, forcing the discussion away from vague political language. Workers gathering nearby began questioning why a whole family should prove something that was already obvious to everyone watching. Their support mattered because many had held respected positions before being sent down and were not afraid to challenge weak reasoning. Zhao suggested moving the discussion into his office, where the crowd would no longer hear every uncomfortable detail. Weiwei refused the escape route and asked instead to see Shiwan, now that the supposed problem with her background had collapsed. She made clear that she remembered Zhao helping her once, but gratitude would never stop her from protecting her husband. Faced with witnesses and facts he could not most dismiss, Zhao finally admitted that Shiwan was being held in a restricted confinement room. Only Weiwei was allowed to enter, so she left the Chen family outside and followed Zhao toward a red brick building. His warning that everything had been standard procedure only made Weiwei more anxious about what she was about to find. The confinement room smelled of mold, with cracked brick walls, a barred window, an iron door, and almost nothing resembling comfort. Shiwan lay on a wooden plank bed with his wrists tied above him, the rope already rubbing the skin raw. Weiwei's first fear was that he had been beaten, so she checked his breathing before allowing herself to move closer. His eyes opened when she called his name, and his immediate concern was how she had managed to enter the restricted building. Weiwei pulled scissors from her space, cut through the bindings, and inspected him for injuries before listening to any reassurance. Wan grew embarrassed when she nearly searched under his clothes, but Weiwei cared far more about hidden bruises than his shyness. Once convinced he was physically unharmed, she told him plainly that she had not come merely to visit. She was taking him home. Outside, Zhao noticed her tears and tried to frame the situation as something he understood from her emotional perspective. Weiwei rejected sympathy in place of actions, asking only whether the cadre school would behave fairly now that her background was clarified. Zhao hesitated, then conceded that the original reason for confinement no longer existed and Shiwan could be released. Weiwei immediately returned to the room and helped her husband up rather than giving anyone time to reconsider. The way she had challenged officials, brought witnesses, exposed the false assumption, and returned for him, changed something inside Shiwan. He squeezed her hand and called his wife incredible, leaving Weiwei unexpectedly shy after spending the morning in open confrontation. Zhao and Shiwan exchanged a silent look as the couple passed, but neither man turned the moment into another argument. Workers in the courtyard cheered when Shiwan appeared free, joking that finding a loyal wife suddenly seemed more important than rank. Weiwei led him to the waiting Chen family, thanked them for coming, and finally began the trip home with her husband beside her. Father Hua and Sanzi were already back, and both treated Weiwei's public rescue of Shiwan like a successful military operation. Sanzi eagerly described Zhao's miserable expression when the married couple walked out together, but Shiwan stopped the teasing before it grew cruel. He insisted Weiwei had endured enough for one day and brought her away from the family's questions so she could finally rest. In their room, the tension of the previous night gave way to quiet affection as Shiwan held the wife who had refused to abandon him. Even then, he kept his self-control because Weiwei was pregnant, and neither of them wanted emotion to create a new danger. Shiwan suggested visiting the county hospital after the autumn harvest so they could properly check the pregnancy and the baby's condition. As they settled down, Weiwei suddenly remembered that the monthly lottery had produced another reward she had not yet examined. The item was an unusually delicate piece of clothing, embarrassing enough that showing it to Shiwan instantly changed the atmosphere again. Their playful intimacy remained careful, rather than reckless, reinforcing how quickly an arranged survival marriage had become a genuine partnership. By morning, Weiwei was still embarrassed by the previous night's teasing, while Shiwan found her attempt to act unaffected impossible to resist. Breakfast shifted the family back toward practical life when Mother Hua raised a serious concern about Weiwei managing the village school alone. Pregnancy would make teaching, supervising children, and handling daily school problems increasingly difficult as the months passed. Mother Hua therefore offered to accompany her every day, help with small tasks, and bring little N along to begin learning. Weiwei welcomed the idea, worried only that the rough school conditions might exhaust a woman who had already endured so much. Mother Hua preferred useful work to sitting home, waiting, especially if she could use her old performing experience with the children. Father Hua supported the plan immediately, imagining his wife leading songs and dances while Weiwei focused on lessons and school management. The arrangement also gave in other children to play with, and kept Mother Hua from feeling isolated inside the house. Sanzi joked that the family was becoming perfectly organized, only for Mother Hua to respond that finding him a wife should come next. His embarrassment entertained everyone at the table, giving the household a rare peaceful morning after several days of political pressure. Weiwei and Mother Hua then headed toward the school, where Lin Xiaojiao and her companions had spent the night guarding their books. The rival girls had become obsessed with proving themselves after challenging Weiwei over who deserved to teach the village children. Their determination looked impressive until the exhaustion on their faces revealed that they had sacrificed sleep merely to protect copied materials. Weiwei understood that their challenge was less about education than pride, jealousy, and another attempt to take control of something she built. Instead of arguing at the gate, she focused on the students, trusting that actual preparation would matter more than loud claims. Mother Hua quickly adapted to the classroom, helping younger children settle, while Weiwei organized lessons for a school still short on supplies. The biggest weakness remained books, because students were sharing limited materials, and several girls believed copying enough pages could make them qualified teachers. Weiwei knew the school needed a permanent solution, instead of another temporary argument over who possessed the best handwritten notes. Her secret space offered possibilities unavailable to anyone else. But using those resources openly required an explanation people in this era would accept. That meant every magical advantage had to be converted into an ordinary-looking chain of cause, purchase, donation, or lucky connection. Weiwei began planning around Principal Mang, a man willing to spend money if doing so solve the school problem without creating political trouble. She needed enough books for the children, a believable donor, and a delivery method that would not expose where the materials truly came from. The challenge was exactly the kind of problem her space handled best. Scarce resources outside could sometimes be abundant inside. Rather than showing off the ability, Weiwei treated the space as a quiet logistics tool, supporting the life she wanted to build. The school itself had already become more important than anyone expected, drawing children from several villages instead of serving one small group. That growth meant every shortage multiplied quickly, from desks and teachers to paper, textbooks, supervision, and basic classroom order. Mother Hua's arrival solved part of the staffing problem, but Weiwei still needed to protect the school's direction from adults chasing status. Lin Xiaojiao remained the most immediate nuisance because she wanted the title of teacher without demonstrating the patience or responsibility children required. Her companions copied that confidence, assuming enthusiasm, and a few books were enough to place them beside Weiwei at the front of a classroom. Weiwei refused to let personal rivalry decide the matter because an incompetent teacher would make the students pay for someone else's vanity. She therefore turned the dispute into a practical standard. Anyone claiming to teach should prove knowledge, preparation, and usefulness to the school. That approach deprived Lin Xiaojiao of the emotional fight she wanted and shifted attention toward results that could actually be measured. Meanwhile, Weiwei kept the supporting character booklet hidden, studying its clues whenever new behavior made one of the listed people relevant. The booklet did not solve problems automatically. It simply exposed motives and relationships that helped her choose where to apply pressure. Zhao's entry had already proven its value by showing why Shiwan was targeted and preventing Weiwei from wasting time on the wrong enemy. More importantly, Shiwan now understood that his wife was not merely reacting to danger. She was learning to anticipate how people moved. Their partnership strengthened because he respected her decisions instead of demanding control over powers only she fully understood. Weiwei, in return, trusted Shiwan with the existence of the space, its lottery, and the strange advantages appearing inside it. That trust made the secret less lonely and gave every new reward a practical question. How could it strengthen the family without exposing them? The coming book competition offered a relatively safe test because educational supplies could be explained through donations and outside contacts. If Weiwei succeeded, the children would gain real materials, while Lin Xiaojiao's challenge would collapse, without needing a personal feud. She began gathering information on what grades the school needed, which subjects were missing, and how many copies would actually be useful. Mother Hua handled the younger children nearby, giving Weiwei enough freedom to think beyond the immediate noise of the classroom. By treating each crisis as infrastructure rather than drama, Weiwei slowly turned exile into a place where her family could establish roots. The difference was already visible. Officials had tried to break her marriage, yet the result left Shiwan more devoted, and both families more united. A shortage of teachers had invited Lin Xiaojiao's challenge, but it also pushed Mother Hua into a meaningful role outside the home. A shortage of books now threatened the school, and Weiwei was already searching for a solution large enough to outlast the argument. These were small victories compared with the future she remembered, but each one reduced the family's dependence on people who could turn hostile. Shiwan supported that approach because he had seen how quickly political convenience could become confinement when someone else controlled the narrative. For both of them, independence did not mean isolation. It meant building enough relationships, skills, food, and credibility that one accusation could not destroy everything. The school offered exactly that kind of foundation by tying their household to ordinary villagers, whose children were benefiting directly from Weiwei's work. Every parent who saw improvement became another witness that the supposedly troublesome sent-down family was creating value instead of causing problems. Weiwei never announced this strategy publicly, but she understood that reputation could become protection when formal status remained unstable. At the same time, she refused to exploit the children merely for political cover, because their education had become a responsibility she genuinely valued. That distinction would matter later when several villages began competing for ownership of the school. the prestige attached to it. For now, however, the next battle was much simpler. Lin Xiaojiao believed a pile of copied books could defeat Weiwei. Weiwei intended to answer with enough real books to make the entire challenge look painfully small. And because the space had already delivered one impossible solution, she suspected the next draw might expand her options, and Sanzi kept insisting he enjoyed bachelor life, which only encouraged Shiwan to promise he would remember that claim. When marriage eventually found him, Weiwei escaped the brothers' teasing by taking breakfast and leaving with Mother Hua and Anne for the village school. It was Mother Hua's first real outing since the family arrived, and her composed appearance immediately drew curious looks from villagers. She worried her simple clothes looked strange, but Weiwei assured her that people were staring because she still carried herself with unusual elegance. Little N proved even more noticeable, charming village women by complimenting their scarves and kindness without the slightest shyness. When someone offered her popcorn, N politely refused because she had not done the hard labor that earned the woman's work snack. The adults laughed at her seriousness, while Mother Hua quietly wondered which relative had given the child such an open, affectionate personality. Weiwei was briefly reminded of the missing members of Shiwan's family, but she kept the mood light and guided everyone towards school. Before entering the Women's Federation courtyard, they heard shouting from inside, and Weiwei immediately moved Mother Hua and N behind her. Lin Xiaojiao had arrived with several young women, loudly arguing that basic literacy should qualify any of them to become teachers. Their complaint was simple. The school used communal village resources, so they believed Weiwei had no special right to control the teaching positions. Xiao Mingju stood against them with a broom, furious that people who had done nothing to build the school now wanted its benefits. Weiwei stepped between both sides before the argument became physical and asked Lin Xiaojiao to explain what qualification she actually offered. The real motive was obvious to Weiwei. Zhao Shuya was nearby, and Lin Xiaojiao wanted a respectful salaried position that might impress him. Mingju argued that Weiwei had already proven herself by organizing lessons, managing students, and keeping the barely funded school functioning. Rather than defend herself emotionally, Weiwei surprised everyone by welcoming the possibility of another teacher if the candidate could earn the position. Since the school could not support 6 extra salaries, she suggested the women first decide which one of them deserved consideration. That single proposal immediately shattered their temporary alliance, as every candidate invented a different standard favoring herself. One preferred test scores, another age, and others began insulting each other's abilities until the courtyard sounded like a market dispute. Weiwei watched quietly, allowing their own competition to expose how little cooperation existed beneath the shared attack on her. Then, she deliberately praised Lin Xiaojiao for staying calmer than the others and suggested choosing her by default. The village women instantly redirected their resentment toward Lin Xiaojiao, accusing an outsider of trying to steal a local teaching position. Lin Xiaojiao understood Weiwei had turned the group against her, but she swallowed her anger and proposed a formal competition instead. Confident after living through 2 lifetimes, she believed grades, age, and general ability would still place her above ordinary village girls. Weiwei changed the test entirely, arguing that dedication mattered more than elementary knowledge when the students did not even possess textbooks. Her condition was practical and brutal. Whoever produced 37 complete textbook sets for the children would earn the teaching position. Most candidates recoiled because buying that many books would cost far more than the small salary they hoped to collect. Lin Xiaojiao instead raised the stakes, demanding that Weiwei lose her own position if another candidate solved the textbook shortage first. Director Li wanted to object, but Weiwei quietly asked her to accept because the challenge aligned perfectly with a plan already forming. Both sides agreed on a 3-day deadline, and Lin Xiaojiao immediately gathered notebooks and prepared to copy entire textbooks by hand. She mocked Weiwei for lacking connections, certain that finding more than 1,000 books in reciprocal conditions was impossible. After the challengers scattered, Director Li calculated the real scale: multiple subjects, several grades, both semesters, and dozens of students. Mingju offered to beg families for donations, but Weiwei stopped her because exhausting villagers would only create another problem, and confidently announced that her second aunt always had a plan, which gave the worried adults more faith than Weiwei expected. A few Women's Federation workers searched their homes for spare materials, while Weiwei mounted her bicycle and rode toward Rome County Elementary. It was the only proper school nearby. with modest brick classrooms and only a few dozen students in each grade. The gatekeeper recognized the village school project immediately and treated Weiwei warmly once she mentioned Director Li and the Women's Federation. Principal Mang received her in his office, already supportive of the attempt to bring regular education to children who rarely had the opportunity. Weiwei explained that her school shared a cramped courtyard with the Women's Federation and desperately lacked complete teaching materials. She asked only to examine textbooks covering every subject from 1st through 5th grade, intending to solve the rest herself. Principal Mang understood the shortage because textbooks were expensive luxuries in families still struggling to secure enough food. Impressed by Weiwei's determination, he sent a staff member to collect complete spare copies from teachers across every grade. While they waited, the principal casually asked how Women's Federation workers felt about the school. Hinting at relationships Weiwei did not yet understand. He then offered to personally donate 10 complete sets, an amount worth a small fortune by local standards. Weiwei thanked him sincerely, but declined for the moment because accepting unnecessary charity would complicate a problem her space could already solve. The staff member eventually returned with stacks, organized by grade, semester, and subject, giving Weiwei exactly the reference collection she needed. Once alone, she transferred herself and the books into the secret space, where the small television spirit immediately became curious. Weiwei ignored its chatter and summoned the treasure pot, one of the space's strangest and most useful rewards. She placed the first-grade textbooks inside, and the pot produced dozens of identical new copies within moments. The result confirmed the solution. One legitimate original could become enough books for an entire classroom without draining anyone's savings. Weiwei repeated the process grade by grade until towering stacks of language, mathematics, politics, labor, and general knowledge books covered the space. The television proudly joked that processing so many books made it educated, while Weiwei reminded it that swallowing textbooks did not equal learning. Its next suggestion was actually useful. Students needed notebooks and pencils just as badly as they needed printed lessons. Weiwei returned briefly to Principal Mang's office, borrowed examples of those supplies, and duplicated them through the treasure pot as well. Soon the space held enough basic materials to support the village children far beyond the 3-day competition. She still did not know the treasure pot's exact limits, but everything tested so far had been copied cleanly and without visible defects. Before leaving the space, Weiwei returned every borrowed original to precisely the same position to avoid raising unnecessary questions. She then sat with a mathematics book, so her presence in the principal's office still looked like an ordinary educational visit. Principal Mang returned from class and noticed her choice of subject, giving Weiwei an opening to discuss how teaching duties were divided at her school. She explained that another instructor handled language better, while her own strengths leaned toward practical organization and mathematics. The conversation helped Weiwei learn what formal schools considered normal lesson structure, pacing, and material use across different grades. Those details mattered because duplicating books solved scarcity. But good resources alone would not make the village school effective. Weiwei wanted children to learn enough that parents would eventually value education even during seasons, when every extra worker mattered. She also understood that the school could not depend forever on one teacher, one space, or one lucky series of magical rewards. Mother Hua joining the classroom was therefore more valuable than simple help. It was the first step toward distributing responsibility. Principal Mang's willingness to cooperate created another connection that could make future requests look ordinary instead of miraculous. The duplicated books would still need a believable public explanation, because appearing with hundreds of new volumes overnight could attract the wrong attention. Weiwei therefore planned to connect the materials to Principal Mang and outside support without falsely claiming he had personally paid for everything. The trick was not hiding that help existed. It was ensuring no one traced the quantity back to an impossible pot inside another dimension. Lin Xiaojiao believed the contest measured who could work hardest for 3 days. But Weiwei was solving the underlying supply chain. That difference reflected the advantage of Weiwei's second life. She rarely treated a problem as only the problem visible on the surface. The same thinking had defeated the divorce scheme by separating false background claims from Zhao Shuya's private motive. Now, it would defeat a teaching challenge by separating the children's need for books from the challenger's need for status. Every successful solution strengthened the same larger goal: keeping Shiwan's family stable while making countryside life less dependent on hostile institutions. Weiwei did not yet call it an empire, and nobody around her would have understood such ambition in these circumstances. What she was actually building first was harder to attack: food security, education, useful relationships, and a household people wanted to protect. The space supplied leverage, but Weiwei's decisions determined whether that leverage became another dangerous secret or a sustainable advantage. For the textbook problem, the safest path was clear: use ordinary originals, duplicate privately, then introduce the finished resources through a credible channel. By the time Lin Xiaojiao finished copying even a fraction of her first set, Weiwei already possessed enough materials for every student. She still had 3 days before the deadline, which meant there was no reason to rush the public reveal and invite suspicion. Instead, Weiwei used the remaining time to learn from Principal Mang, observe formal classrooms, and prepare the school for what came after victory. The contest would end soon, but the students would keep needing lessons long after Lin Xiaojiao lost interest in proving herself. Weiwei intended to make sure the resources survived the rivalry, because that was the only result worth winning. Principal Meng agreed that language arts required broader knowledge and praised Weiwei for matching people to roles instead of guarding every responsibility herself. When Weiwei casually asked how long he had known Director Li, the principal became visibly uncomfortable and changed the subject almost immediately. He invited her to observe a third-grade mathematics lesson, which gave Weiwei practical ideas for pacing, explanations, and classroom structure. Afterward, Weiwei declined lunch and promised that next time she visited the county, she would repay his help with a meal. The gatekeeper jokingly suggested inviting Director Li too, causing Principal Meng to shut him down with suspicious speed. Right then, Director Li appeared behind them, having ridden all the way to the county because Weiwei had vanished without explanation. Her sharp arrival reduced both men to nervous silence and confirmed that some unresolved history existed between the director and Principal Meng. Weiwei was delighted to see her, but Director Li immediately demanded to know whether the textbook challenge had driven her into hiding. Principal Meng offered money again when he learned the school needed books, only for Director Li to reject his help before Weiwei answered. Students leaving for lunch noticed the strange tension and whispered that their principal looked like a child being scolded by his superior. Director Li finally ordered Weiwei onto the bicycle, and the principal's attempt to stop them collapsed under one cold glance. On the road home, Weiwei teased that Principal Mang obviously liked Director Li, but the older woman dismissed the subject with unusual bitterness. Her harsh words did not match her actions, because she had still visited the very man she disliked simply to help Weiwei find textbooks. Touched by that loyalty, Weiwei secretly pulled a white rabbit candy from her space and slipped it into Director Li's mouth. Director Li accepted the thanks, but warned that a piece of candy would not excuse disappearing while everyone else worried. She described Lin Xiaojiao's group, racing through villages, borrowing books, tracing pages, and recruiting relatives who barely remembered school. Weiwei finally revealed that the books were already handled, stopping the bicycle so abruptly that Director Li nearly lost control. The director's suspicion immediately turned toward Principal Mang, but Weiwei only said that meeting him had helped her discover a complete solution. She promised that all 37 students would have proper sets by the deadline, without asking the director to understand every detail. Director Li suggested revealing the victory early, so the rival girls would not waste 3 days copying books for nothing. Wei Fei refused because she wanted one painful lesson to discourage 100 future attempts to challenge the school for selfish reasons. Director Li accused the 18-year-old of applying battlefield strategy to a teenage quarrel, though a small smile showed she approved. When the conversation returned to Principal Mang, Director Li warned Weiwei not to visit him again, and called the advice something bought with blood and tears. Weiwei stopped probing once she realized the history involved genuine pain rather than the simple romance everyone around them suspected. They spent the rest of the ride discussing the school's future, a subject that softened Director Li far more than anything personal. Back at the Women's Federation, the courtyard had become a chaotic workshop filled with borrowed books, copied pages, and exhausted volunteers. Lin Xiaojiao strutted past, carrying more than 100 volumes, and mocked Weiwei for returning from the county apparently empty-handed. Weiwei asked one question: were those books complete sets covering every required subject and grade, rather than an impressive-looking random pile? That distinction ruined Lin Xiaojiao's celebration and sent her straight back to copying, while Weiwei calmly prepared for afternoon class. Mother Hua and Mingju worried because they saw no books in Weiwei's hands, but she assured them the solution was already secured. Mingju had managed to find only 3 books, yet her disappointment revealed how determined she was to repay Weiwei's earlier help. Weiwei knew Mingju would continue searching after school, even if told to stop, because loyalty mattered more to her than convenience. Afternoon lessons passed normally, proving that Weiwei would not let a personal contest consume the education the contest supposedly concerned. At dismissal, Lin Xiaojiao and the others blocked the gate, openly accusing Weiwei of planning to steal their collection overnight. Weiwei mocked the suspicion by suggesting they sleep at school if they distrusted both her and one another that much. Several girls immediately sat back down, revealing that she had accurately identified the fear beneath their temporary cooperation. Lin Xiaojiao stayed as well, choosing another uncomfortable night over the possibility of losing books to her own allies. Weiwei left without concern and found Shiwan waiting outside, where Mother Hua immediately teased that her son had come to collect his wife. Shiwan claimed he was checking on his mother's first day, but En announced that marriage had trained her uncle to speak sweetly. The adults laughed, and Mother Hua deliberately took En toward the fields so the young couple could walk home alone. Shiwan admitted the obvious by taking Weiwei's hand and leading her away from the village path toward a sheltered hollow behind the mountain. The hidden patch was overgrown with brush, but he saw chicken coops, open ground, and a small livestock project waiting beneath the weeds. He had already asked about local rules and learned that families could raise poultry for themselves and trade eggs or animals for necessities. Direct, private selling remained restricted, but ordinary people still used barter and personal exchanges to survive within the system. Weiwei worried that Shiwan already faced cadre school pressure and that caring for animals would add exhausting work to his days. He answered that the money and resources in her space might technically be hers, but he refused to become a husband who contributed nothing. Shiwan knew Weiwei would feed him even if he never earned another grain, and that certainty was exactly he wanted his own responsibility. His determination pleased her because their household worked best when every capable person moved toward the same future, instead of depending on one miracle. They agreed that Shiwan and Sanzi would clear the hollow before winter, while Weiwei helped only where pregnancy made the work safe. When she volunteered to join them every evening, Shiwan examined her hands and quickly turned the conversation into teasing. Too embarrassing to repeat, Weiwei hit his chest, while he insisted a husband had no reason to act modest around his own wife. He eventually scooped her up and carried her down the mountain, making it impossible for Weiwei to continue. Pretending she was not tired, the family had dinner waiting in the courtyard, with Sanzi proudly presenting scrambled eggs that immediately became another target for affectionate teasing. En declared the eggs delicious, and sincerely hoped some kind woman would marry her uncle, leaving Sanzi with no defense against a child. Father and Mother Hua watched the younger generation laugh around the table, a warmth that felt especially valuable after years of uncertainty. Mother Hua quietly slipped Weiwei 2 extra boiled eggs because pregnancy made nutrition more important than equal portions. Weiwei had an entire hidden space full of food, but the small gesture moved her because the family was giving from what they actually possessed. She was about to share with En when movement beyond the courtyard wall revealed several shadowy figures crouched outside watching the house. Weiwei stood immediately, and the hidden observers panicked, running before anyone inside could identify them properly. Their embarrassed shouting suggested they were young women spying rather than thieves, but the reason for watching the Hua household remained unclear. Shiwan and Sanzi prepared to chase them while Weiwei considered whether the visitors might be connected to the squaw or simple village curiosity. The incident reinforced a problem the family faced everywhere. Once people became interesting, helpful, or controversial, privacy disappeared quickly. Weiwei had already learned to treat attention as both risk and information, because people revealed motives simply by where they chose to watch. The textbook competition was attracting exactly that kind of attention, as girls carried books through multiple villages and argued over a tiny salaried post. Parents were beginning to understand that the small Women's Federation classroom had become something worth fighting over, even before officials recognized its value. Weiwei wanted to keep the school useful enough to survive that attention, without allowing prestige to replace its original purpose. That meant real books, dependable teachers, and children who improved visibly rather than a ceremonial signboard adults could use for status. Her treasure pot had solved the most expensive shortage, but she still needed a believable way to introduce hundreds of duplicated supplies. Principal Meng provided the perfect bridge because his formal school possessed legitimate books, educational connections, and a public reason to support rural students. Director Li's involvement added another layer of credibility, even though her complicated relationship with Meng made Weiwei reluctant to exploit the connection. The safest explanation would therefore spread credit across several supporters, instead of making one person responsible for an impossible quantity. Weiwei also planned to reveal the books only when the deadline arrived, keeping the magical advantage hidden until no one could imitate her route. Lin Xiaozhao interpreted that silence as weakness and pushed herself harder, exactly as Weiwei expected. Every copied page consumed time. The rival could have spent building genuine trust with students, which made the contest increasingly self-defeating. Meanwhile, Weiwei continued teaching, strengthening relationships with parents and children, while the challengers exhausted themselves guarding stacks of incomplete books. The contrast made Shiwan even more certain that his wife's real advantage was not simply the space but how calmly she used it. He could contribute muscle, farm labor, livestock care, and protection. Weiwei contributed planning, hidden resources, education, and a memory of another life. Together, those strengths were beginning to produce something neither had possessed when they first arrived in the countryside: control over their own direction. The family still faced political suspicion, food limits, village rivalries, and hostile relatives, but every solved problem left behind something useful. The forced divorce scheme had created stronger family unity, while the teacher dispute was about to leave the village with a real library. Shiwan's worry about providing had become a livestock plan, and Mother Hua's loneliness had become a new role helping children. Weiwei noticed the pattern, even if she never said it aloud. Pressure kept forcing the household to build systems that made them harder to uproot. Before winter arrived, she intended to make sure the next system was food, because books could change futures, but full stomachs kept people alive. The fleeing shadows turned out to be young women spying from outside the courtyard, which briefly made Weiwei wonder whether they were watching Shiwan. Shiwan looked genuinely confused, and Father Hua immediately warned his son that betraying such a devoted wife would cost him both legs. Weiwei stopped the family from escalating the misunderstanding because she trusted Shiwan's character, even if the strange attention irritated her. San Zi added that Zhao had effectively banned women from lingering near the cadre school, making flirting there almost impossible anyway. His joking reassurance worked, and Weiwei punished Shiwan with nothing worse than the dishes after deciding jealousy was not worth a household argument. That night, she entered the space again, because completing a full month of daily check-ins had unlocked a major reward cycle. The system delivered 600 yuan, a huge amount for their circumstances. But Weiwei was more interested in information than cash. She reopened the supporting character handbook and searched every entry for anyone whose listed person of interests was Shiwan. A woman named Muanting finally appeared with Shiwan connected to her profile, confirming that another relationship threat might eventually approach them. Weiwei did not know the woman and had no evidence of wrongdoing, so she treated the entry as a warning rather than a reason to accuse her husband. The little television spirit then announced that the completed check-in month had unlocked expanded rewards across people, emotion, and desire categories. Its first absurd interpretation of family bonds produced two goats, a mother and her young one, both healthy and extremely valuable. The second reward dropped a flock of hens into the space, justified by the television with the ridiculous claim that chickens caused no emotional guilt. Beneath the joke was a perfect coincidence. Shiwan had just planned chicken coops, and the space had supplied the livestock to fill them. Even more important, the television casually revealed that it could trade with neighboring spaces to obtain resources from other owners and eras. Weiwei immediately understood the scale of that ability, because cross-space exchange could solve shortages no local market could touch. The final category produced a mahjong set for winter entertainment, proving the system's definition of human desire was broader than Weiwei expected. She praised the television anyway, knowing that even ridiculous rewards could become useful when rural winters left families isolated for months. After the milestone rewards, Weiwei began a new lottery month and noticed the prize pool itself appeared to have improved. The screen shook violently during the draw before ejecting 6 square plots of unusually dark, fertile soil called Easy Grow. Weiwei immediately tested the farmland with potato pieces because she wanted to know whether it could produce vegetables regardless of season. The television explained that crops still needed time, but the magical soil could create ideal growing conditions inside the space. After roughly an hour of activity, the television shut down to rest, revealing another limitation Weiwei would need to remember. When she returned to the bedroom, Shiwan grabbed her in relief because she had remained inside far longer than on previous visits. Weiwei reassured him, then decided the easiest explanation was a demonstration rather than another long description of impossible rewards. More than a dozen chickens and 2 goats suddenly appeared in the room, along with a mahjong set and Weiwei's excited explanation. Shiwan barely had time to process the miracle before panicked birds filled the bedroom with noise, and his parents heard livestock through the wall. Weiwei swept everything back into the space before anyone entered, leaving father and mother Hua wondering whether both of them had imagined the sounds. Shiwan tried to explain that he and Weiwei had simply been playing, which made the misunderstanding far more embarrassing than the animals themselves. They finally agreed to keep the livestock hidden until proper coops and pens could make their sudden appearance believable. The next morning, Weiwei returned to school with Mother Hua and En, finding Lin Xiaojiao's group washing. After another sleepless night, the challengers had guarded their books like treasure, certain that exhaustion proved they were working harder than Weiwei. Before anyone could start another argument, a child approached Weiwei with a battered textbook, borrowed from an uncle in another village. More students followed, pulling old books from pockets and bags because they had spent their own time trying to help the teacher they trusted. Some brought 1 book, others several, and none cared that their contribution looked small beside the challengers' enormous piles. Their loyalty moved Weiwei more than the contest itself because the children were defending the person who had treated their education seriously. Lin Xiaojiao mocked the tiny collection, but the students answered that they wanted teacher Weiwei regardless of who owned more books. Weiwei turned that support into another jab, reminding Lin Xiaojiao that jealousy would not finish the missing sets. Before the deadline, the rival nearly cursed in front of the children, but stopped herself, unwilling to damage the teacher image she was trying to manufacture. Mingju remained nervous and offered once again to search for books, convinced Weiwei's calmness hid a plan that might still fail. Weiwei finally promised that the supply problem was solved and redirected Mingju towards something the children could enjoy immediately. She proposed cooking a chicken for lunch, shocking Mingju because the communal kitchen had not served meat like that in years. Weiwei claimed her mother had sent the bird, then quietly pulled one from the space where nobody could see. Mingju handled the plucking, while Mother Hua took charge of cooking, combining chicken with potatoes and chili peppers on the school stove. The smell spread through the entire courtyard and turned the final morning lesson into a test of every child's concentration. Weiwei promised they could eat after 1 more reading exercise, and the class attacked the lesson with enough volume to shake the walls. Even Lin Xiaojiao's group stopped copying long enough to follow the aroma, already imagining bowls filled with meat and broth. Weiwei had no intention of excluding anyone cruelly, but the meal primarily rewarded students who had supported the school rather than adults chasing a job. Food carried emotional weight in a period when meat was rare, making one chicken more memorable to the children than another speech about dedication. Mother Hua understood that instinctively and stretched the dish with potatoes so every child could receive something, without leaving the pot empty immediately. The meal also demonstrated another quiet advantage of the space. Livestock could support relationships and nutrition without appearing as obvious magic. Weiwei still needed to introduce the chickens carefully, because a poor sent-down family suddenly producing endless meat would invite dangerous questions. Shiwan's planned coops offered the answer by creating a visible source people could understand before the household increased its food supply. The goats could be handled similarly once the family prepared a pen and an explanation for how they acquired them. Each reward therefore had 2 stages in Weiwei's mind. First gaining the resource, then building the ordinary world structure that made using it safe. That habit separated her from people who would have treated the space as a magical warehouse and exposed themselves within weeks. The textbook copies followed the same principle, with Principal Mang's school providing legitimate originals and the village school providing obvious need. Easy grow would require even more patience because extraordinary seeds could affect entire harvests once moved outside the space. Weiwei had not tested that possibility yet, but the rich black soil immediately pushed food security higher on her list of priorities. A family could survive political pressure more easily when it possessed food, useful skills, supportive neighbors, and reasons for local leaders to value them. That strategy was already beginning to work, even though Weiwei had never presented it as a formal plan to Shiwan. Children defended her at school. The Chen family publicly supported her marriage, and the Huahao household was becoming more self-sufficient every week. Lin Xiaojiao, by contrast, kept treating every situation as a contest over status, attention, or who looked superior for one afternoon. Her approach produced noise and short-term allies. But those alliances collapsed the moment Weiwei introduced a reward only one person could claim. The textbook challenge was repeating that pattern as each girl quietly worried another would steal books during the night. Weiwei did not need to sabotage them because their distrust was already consuming energy that could have gone toward helping the students. She used the breathing room to teach, plan livestock, study the system, and prepare the next layer of security for her family. The 6 easy grow plots represented the most promising breakthrough because agriculture affected every household in the region, not just her own. If the magical soil merely produced winter vegetables, it would already improve the Hua family's diet during the harsh northeastern cold. If seeds grown there retained better qualities outside the space, the reward could become far more valuable than any pile of lottery money. Weiwei planned to test that question before spring, so she could decide whether the family's future belonged in small private comforts or larger agricultural changes. The answer mattered because she remembered what ordinary crop shortages looked like and how quickly hunger controlled every other decision. Better harvests could mean more grain after quotas, healthier livestock, stronger children, and fewer families forced to choose between school and survival. That vision connected the school and the farmland. In a way nobody else could yet see, education mattered more when families were not starving. Shiwan's livestock plan would benefit too, because extra grain and vegetables could support chickens, ducks, pigs, goats, and trade with neighbors. Sen's hidden system reward was therefore beginning to connect with another, creating a chain of ordinary-looking improvements around the household. Weiwei did not rush the chain because every miracle needed time to acquire paperwork, witnesses, habits, and explanations in the real world. For the moment, the children only knew their teacher had somehow found chicken and still seemed completely unworried about the impossible book deadline. That confidence spread to Mother Hua and Mingju, who finally stopped treating every missing textbook as an emergency. Lin Xiaojiao saw the same calmness and misread it as arrogance, making her work even harder and sleep even less. By lunchtime, the challengers were exhausted, the students were happy, and Weiwei still had her complete hidden library untouched. The deadline was approaching, but the actual outcome had already been decided inside, a space no rival could enter. What remained was choosing the right moment to reveal the victory without revealing the power that made it possible. When the children finally reached the chicken stew, they crowded around Mother Hua with bowls ready and questions about every ingredient. Their excitement lasted until Lin Xiaojiao and her companions pushed forward with lunchboxes, each demanding the best pieces for themselves. Mother Hua hesitated because one chicken was already being stretched across dozens of students, but Mingju stepped between the pot and the adults. She reminded the challengers that the meal had been prepared for children, not women competing for a salary and a respectable title. Lin Xiaojiao attacked Mingju's background instead, calling her a servant who had only gained a teaching role through Weiwei's pity. Mingju accepted the insult without retreating and answered that she might lack credentials, but she would never steal food from hungry students. That simple response carried more weight than another argument about because the children were standing directly beside the pot. Lin Xiaojiao accused Weiwei of being cheap, prompting Weiwei to point toward the communal kitchen, where every adult already had a meal. If the challengers considered themselves generous, Weiwei suggested they slaughter one of their own chickens, rather than fighting children for hers. The older students immediately formed a protective wall, and the rival women were pushed away, before the meal could become another confrontation. Once every child had been served, Mingju quietly placed a drumstick in Weiwei's bowl and ate mostly potatoes herself. Weiwei moved that meat between En and Mingju's daughter, while Mother Hua insisted that both young women also take care of themselves. For a few minutes, everyone shared small portions without competition, creating exactly the kind of school culture Weiwei wanted to protect. Mingju noticed the bird had been unusually large and asked how Weiwei's biological parents managed to raise chickens that well. Weiwei improvised a simple explanation about good husbandry, knowing that the real answer involved livestock traded into her private space. The question planted another idea. If Shiwan raised this breed in the mountain hollow, the family could produce unusually strong free-range chickens. Properly fed birds could provide eggs, meat, barter, and a believable origin for future animals brought out of the space. Across the courtyard, Lin Xiaojiao ate plain vegetables and watched the students enjoy food she believed Weiwei never deserved. She told the other women that the old Weiwei had once been soft enough to manipulate easily, but they dismissed the boast as jealousy. Their disbelief forced Lin Xiaojiao to confront something she had been avoiding. The woman before her behaved nothing like the victim she remembered. The realization became a terrifying possibility in her mind, that Weiwei might also have returned with knowledge from another life. Lin Xiaojiao suddenly confronted Weiwei, claiming she understood why Weiwei had chosen Shiwan, despite knowing his family would later be sent down. Mother Hua immediately defended her daughter-in-law, while Lin Xiaojiao accused Weiwei of allowing disaster so the Hua family would become dependent on her. The accusation went far beyond school rivalry and attacked the trust holding the entire household together. When Lin Xiaojiao insulted Mother Hua directly, Weiwei crossed the distance and slapped her before the older woman could be humiliated further. Lin Xiaojiao tried to retaliate, but Zhao Shuya entered at that moment and caught her wrist before the strike landed. His intervention barely mattered, because Shiwan had already reached Weiwei and pulled his wife safely against him. Weiwei treated Lin Xiaojiao's claims as irrational, asking why someone who predicted the future would have tolerated years of earlier abuse. Lin Xiaojiao nearly revealed the truth about her own previous life, while arguing, then stopped when she realized nobody would believe such a confession. Instead, she vowed to expose whatever had changed Weiwei and fled the courtyard before anger made her say something even more dangerous. Zhao tried to check on Weiwei afterward, but Shiwan physically placed himself between them and ended the possibility of a private exchange. Mother Hua assured Weiwei that one enemy's accusations could not erase everything the families had seen from her since arriving together. Shiwan explained that he and Zhao were visiting the village to observe the harvest and ask whether residents needed assistance. Weiwei asked them to escort Mother Hua home to rest, then return to the classroom instead of chasing Lin Xiaojiao's latest threat. Away from the school, however, Lin Xiaojiao was finally reconstructing the past with the advantage of her own rebirth memories. In her previous life, she had learned that her biological parents were wealthy and that another village girl had been raised in her place. She manipulated events until the families discovered the switch, then returned to determined to punish the girl who had lived her life. That punishment had been systematic: family rejection, damaged reputation, and a terrible marriage eventually reduced Weiwei's first life to misery. Lin Xiaojiao had called it justice because she believed every advantage Weiwei received had originally belonged to her. This second timeline initially followed the same pattern until one specific night shattered the future Lin Xiaojiao remembered. She had drugged Weiwei and Shiwan, expecting their compromising situation to become a scandal that destroyed both of them. Instead, the Hua family formally proposed marriage, and the couple she expected to separate became openly devoted to one another. When the Hua family was later sent down, Weiwei followed Shiwan rather than using the crisis to escape him. That divergence convinced Lin Xiaojiao that Weiwei either possessed rebirth knowledge or some other advantage capable of changing predetermined events. Rather than reconsider her own actions, Lin Xiaojiao decided the answer was to defeat Weiwei again and reclaim Zhao Shuya for herself. She remembered winning Zhao in the earlier life and assumed more effort, better clothing, and aggressive pursuit could reproduce that result. Her renewed confidence lasted only until she reached home and met a stocky middle-aged woman, introducing herself as her future mother-in-law. The visitor was Su Wangkai's mother, who cheerfully announced that her son wanted the pretty Lin daughter as his wife. Lin Xiaojiao reacted with disgust because she believed marrying an ordinary village man was beneath the future she remembered. Su's mother made everything worse by praising Lin Xiaojiao as hardworking, sturdy, and suitable for bearing sons after a rural upbringing. Those words struck directly at the identity Lin Xiaojiao was trying to escape, and she attacked the woman instead of controlling her anger. Neighbors gathered as the fight spilled outside. Just when father and mother Lin returned, carrying bags from a shopping trip, their expressions exposed the truth before they admitted anything. They had already negotiated with the Su family without their daughter's approval. Su's mother revealed that the Lin parents had begged her family to accept the match and collected 300 yuan as bride price. She demanded every cent back after being insulted and threatened to report the arrangement as marriage fraud if the money disappeared. Lin Xiaojiao ordered her parents to return it immediately, horrified that they had effectively sold her while she was pursuing Zhao. Mother Lin tried to calm the future-in-law, rather than support her daughter, confirming where the family's financial priorities truly sat. The conflict became uglier when insults about Su Wankai's intelligence triggered another physical fight between the two women. Lin Xiaojiao now faced a trap, created partly by the same parents she had manipulated in the previous life to reclaim her identity. Their need for money had changed the balance, and the reborn daughter who expected obedience suddenly discovered she was an asset they could exchange. That reversal did not make her sympathetic toward Weiwei. It only deepened her belief that the altered timeline had stolen the life she deserved. Meanwhile, Weiwei remained at school unaware of most details, focused on students, books, and the family future growing around her. The contrast was becoming sharp. Lin Xiaojiao spent her second chance trying to recreate old control, while Weiwei kept building new options. One woman relied on foreknowledge as entitlement. The other treated experience as a warning against becoming dependent on a single path. Weiwei's marriage survived because she fought for Shiwan instead of calculating whether his temporary status made him useful. Her school improved because she used magical resources to solve actual shortages rather than merely securing a title for herself. The livestock plan mattered because Shiwan wanted responsibility, not because either spouse needed another symbol of superiority. Even the duplicated books were being directed toward children, who could never repay the space for what it provided. Lin Xiaojiao could sense that these choices were changing the timeline, but she still misunderstood the mechanism behind them. She saw Weiwei's improved position and assumed hidden knowledge explained everything, missing the relationships created by repeated acts of trust. That misunderstanding would keep pushing her towards schemes designed for an earlier version of Weiwei, who no longer existed. The Su marriage crisis also created a new variable that neither woman had fully anticipated, tying Lin Xiaojiao to a man absent from her preferred future. For Weiwei, the supporting character handbook would eventually make that connection visible in writing, but not yet. For now, the book deadline still remained, and the students expected their teacher to prove that calm confidence had not been an empty performance. The hidden stacks were ready. The school community was firmly behind her, and Lin Xiaojiao's attention was being divided by family disaster. Weiwei needed only to deliver the materials without exposing the treasure pot, then let the children themselves demonstrate which victory mattered. After that, food would become the next major project, because Easy Grow had already produced clues far more valuable than one school contest. The countryside was beginning to offer exactly what Weiwei needed: space to test ideas, people worth protecting, and problems large enough to justify solutions. Shiwan's family had arrived believing exile meant waiting for circumstances to improve, but Weiwei was slowly turning waiting into preparation. Every ordinary improvement reduced the power of hostile officials, greedy relatives, and old enemies to decide what happened to them next. The next few days would prove whether that approach could survive not just jealousy, but the complicated consequences of two women remembering different futures. Lin Xiaojiao believed foreknowledge gave her ownership of Zhao, wealth, status, and revenge, even when reality kept diverging from the future she remembered. Weiwei had learned the opposite lesson from her first life. Knowing what might happen mattered less than building enough strength to choose differently. The Su family initially considered canceling the marriage after Lin Xiaojiao's violence, but 300 yuan kept the adults negotiating. Mother Lin reminded Su's mother that marriage would connect the couple to the respected Chen household through Lin Xiaojiao's adoptive history. That possibility softened the older woman enough to give the engagement one more chance, provided every coin was returned if trouble continued. Once the Snabers left, Lin Xiaojiao demanded to know why her parents were determined to ruin the future she believed belonged to her. Mother Lin answered brutally that the family had lost its former status and could no longer treat their daughter like a protected city princess. Father Lin made the position even clearer. The bride price had already been spent, so whether Lin Xiaojiao's agreed no longer mattered. Learning that her parents had effectively sold the marriage sent Lin Xiaojiao into a rage that destroyed food, goods, and what remained of household peace. Her brother struck her during the fight, and the confrontation escalated until Lin Xiaojiao grabbed a fire poker and attacked anyone approaching. Years of resentment poured out as she accused her parents of worshipping sons, using daughters, and caring about money only while they possessed it. After barricading herself inside, Lin Zhao discovered the bride price money had already become pastries, canned food, fabric, shoes, and other purchases. She burned items that could not help her and demanded the engagement be cancelled before she allowed the family back into the house. Father Lin refused because he saw the Su household as a practical source of food and security for a daughter who now brought them little benefit. When threats failed, he broke a window, climbed inside with his son, and beat Lin Zhao until she revealed her last bargaining chip. She claimed Zhao Shuya had traveled from the capital because of their correspondence and could become a far more powerful son-in-law. Father Lin immediately asked whether Zhao had actually come for Weiwei instead, a possibility that nearly destroyed Lin Zhao's confidence. She argued that Weiwei was already married and promised she could make Zhao choose her if her father helped create the opportunity. The bargain was simple: prove Zhao could be captured, and Father Lin would reconsider forcing the Su marriage. Before dark, Father Lin approached the cadre school gate alone, because new rules kept women from wandering near the compound. Instead of saying Lin Zhao wanted Zhao, he falsely claimed Weiwei had an urgent private matter she could not reveal to Shiwan's family. A small bribe and the use of Weiwei's name persuaded the guard to carry the message inside. Zhao reacted exactly as Lin Zhao hoped, leaving immediately because he believed Weiwei might be frightened, mistreated, or in need of food. He walked deep into the dark countryside calling for her, exposing the strength of feelings he had never admitted openly. A thin figure finally appeared, and Zhao rushed forward to embrace her before realizing he had grabbed Lin Zhao. Her jealousy exploded because she had watched him run into the night for another man's wife while barely acknowledging her existence. Lin Zhao mocked his moral superiority, arguing that secretly embracing a married woman could destroy Wei, even if Zhao called his feelings pure. The accusation struck hard because reputation in that era could ruin a woman, long before anyone proved what had actually happened.
Zhao nevertheless rejected Lin Zhao completely
And tried to leave rather than accept the twisted similarities she claimed between them. Father Lin was waiting in the darkness and struck Zhao with a club before the younger man could protect himself. Lin Zhao checked that he was unconscious, then helped drag him toward a firewood stack where discovery would create maximum scandal. She began arranging the same kind of compromising trap she had once tried to use against Weiwei and Shiwan. Father Lin even supplied drugs before leaving, showing how completely the family had shifted from matchmaking to manufacturing evidence. Neither schemer knew that Shiwan and Sanzi were hidden nearby and had witnessed enough to understand what was happening. Sanzi wanted to interfere, but Shiwan stopped him, deciding that Zhao and Lin Zhao could face the consequences of choices surrounding them. Shiwan had no sympathy for a man whose interest in Weiwei had already endangered his marriage, especially after Zhao enabled the confinement crisis. The brothers quietly returned home while Father Hua, Mother Hua, and Weiwei were building preparations for the new chicken coops. Sanzi arrived grinning so obviously that Weiwei knew something had happened, but Shiwan cut him off before he could explain. Her best guess was that Shiwan had somehow embarrassed himself, which made Sanzi laugh hard enough to nearly expose the entire secret. Shiwan redirected everyone toward work, and Weiwei eventually stopped asking because this livestock project still needed to be finished. Later, she entered the space and found the little apologizing for shutting down after only an hour of activity. The system imposed that limit deliberately, preventing space owners from relying on the assistant continuously and creating uncontrolled complications. Weiwei pretended the restriction did not matter because the treasure pot and easy grow already gave her plenty to investigate. The potato pieces planted less than a day earlier had transformed into full green plants ready for harvest inside the magical soil. Each plant produced exactly 7 large, healthy potatoes with thin golden skin, a pattern consistent enough to look like an internal rule. The television became jealous when Weiwei praised the farmland and treasure pot, so it revealed more of its hidden capabilities to defend its importance. It could visit neighboring spaces, trade for resources, and gather information from owners living in different points of the timeline. One neighboring owner existed several years ahead, which meant the television could sometimes learn historical events before Weiwei's current world reached them. Its example was the future restoration of the college entrance examination, information Weiwei already knew because she had lived through the era once. That answer stunned the television, finally confirming directly that its owner carried memories beyond the normal limits of her present age. Weiwei immediately shifted away from proving who knew the future and asked the question that mattered more for the family. What happened to easy grow seeds outside? The magical plots accelerated and protected crops internally, but she wanted to know whether descendants, planted in ordinary soil, retained superior qualities. If the answer was yes, 6 tiny plots could eventually influence entire fields without anyone ever seeing the space itself. The television confirmed that outside crops would grow at normal seasonal speed rather than magical speed. However, the seeds could retain much better yield potential and resistance to pests and disease than the varieties currently available. That was far more valuable than winter vegetables, because improved seed stock could multiply every season in real farmland. Weiwei immediately imagined enough grain remaining after quotas for families to eat well, instead of measuring every bowl against survival. Better harvests could then support chickens, ducks, geese, pigs, goats, and cattle rather than forcing people to choose between feeding animals and children. The result would not be instant wealth, but it could create the agricultural base from which lasting households' prosperity actually grew. Weiwei selected the best potatoes for future seed experiments and began planning how to introduce them without claiming impossible origins. The television reminded her that another lottery draw remained, and Weiwei accepted because almost any new resource could now connect with an existing plan. This time, a basket arrived containing packets of vegetables and fruits, including varieties extremely difficult to obtain in her current region. Chili peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, beans, eggplants, strawberries, and watermelon seeds gave Weiwei a much broader agricultural test than potatoes alone. The television admitted the seed stock came from decades in the future through its cross-space trading network. Future breeding meant higher yields and stronger resistance were already built into varieties local farmers had never seen. Weiwei planted watermelon seeds into easy grow and watched the soil automatically adjust moisture and temperature to suit the crop. That response suggested the farmland could optimize conditions by species, though the television shut down before explaining every capability. Back outside, Weiwei showed Shiwan one of the unusually large potatoes and explained how the seed line could perform in ordinary fields. Shiwan immediately understood that this was not merely food for their household, but a potential way to change harvests across the village. He praised his wife, yet Weiwei noticed a trace of pain beneath the admiration and asked what he was holding back. Shiwan admitted that his possessiveness sometimes frightened even him, especially as Weiwei's abilities made more people notice and depend on her. Weiwei answered that devotion only became dangerous when one person controlled the other. Mutual intensity inside an equal partnership felt different. Her reassurance relaxed him because she was not asking Shiwan to become emotionally distant in exchange for respecting her independence. They returned to practical plans, agreeing that superior seeds would be prepared through winter and tested once normal planting season arrived. Weiwei understood that one successful crop would not justify changing an entire region, so the family would need evidence before making larger promises. Shiwan also knew that unusual yields could attract attention, making gradual distribution safer than suddenly transforming every field at once. Their different strengths again fit together. Weiwei could produce the seed, while Shiwan understood labor, village habits, and how ordinary farmers might react. The space had finally moved beyond isolated lottery gifts and begun functioning like an engine, connecting future knowledge with present production. That engine still depended on secrecy because cross-era trade and magical farmland would become dangerous if political authorities interpreted them incorrectly. Weiwei therefore planned to hide the mechanism while allowing real, measurable benefits to appear through ordinary farming. The same strategy had protected the textbook's livestock and money, invisible power inside, understandable results outside. By the time spring arrived, she hoped the countryside that once represented punishment would instead provide land large enough to prove the system's value. For Shiwan, that possibility meant he could contribute to something larger than merely surviving confinement and waiting for his political status to improve. For Weiwei, it meant the first real foundation for lasting wealth had appeared, built from productive land rather than temporary lottery cash. Before any of that could happen, however, the school contest and Lin Xiaojiao's rapidly collapsing plans still had to reach their consequences. The television's reaction to Weiwei's past life knowledge confirmed that she could no longer rely on surprising the system with historical information. More importantly, The outside seed rule gave her a realistic path from one magical harvest toward ordinary fields that could feed entire families. Weiwei planned to grow every useful variety inside the space, preserve strong seed, and wait for spring before testing it publicly. If yields increased after quotas, villagers could finally keep enough food to support both people and livestock through the winter. That possibility felt more valuable than another pile of money, because food production could repeat every year instead of disappearing after one purchase. The future seed packets expanded the plan into vegetables and fruits, whose local versions suffered badly from poor yields and pests. Easy Grow automatically adjusted soil conditions for each crop, allowing Weiwei to prepare breeding material during seasons when outside planting was impossible. Shiwan accepted the agricultural plan quickly, and their conversation about equal devotion eased the possessiveness that had been bothering him. Before sleeping, Weiwei reminded him that the textbook challenge reached its deadline the next morning. Something recent family chaos had made him forget. Sanzi arrived early with news that Lin Xiaojiao might not reach school at all, because rumors claimed she was about to marry Zhao Shuya. Weiwei was stunned, then quietly amused, because she understood that any marriage created through Lin Zhao's schemes would never give her peaceful control. Shiwan worried that Zhao's political position could strengthen their enemy, but Weiwei predicted resentment would make him more obstacle than ally. The discussion ended when Zhao himself appeared outside the Hua home, looking exhausted, disordered, and desperate to speak with Weiwei. He tried to push past Sanzi and Shiwan, prompting Shiwan to punch him before the confrontation entered the family courtyard. Zhao insisted Lin Xiaojiao had tricked and drugged him, and that the previous night did not represent anything he willingly chose. Sanzi immediately asked why an innocent man had still been alone with a woman in the countryside after dark. Zhao ignored the mockery and focused on Weiwei, hoping that explaining the trap would preserve whatever possibility he imagined between them. Weiwei told him there was nothing to preserve, because who Zhao married had never been her concern. He then admitted that Weiwei's marriage did not stop his feelings, and claimed he had sacrificed a comfortable life to come near her. That confession disgusted her more than the previous excuses, because it treated his own desire as a gift she was obligated to value. Weiwei reminded Zhao that arriving at a married woman's home, before her husband and in-laws, created humiliation for her rather than protection. If he truly cared, he would respect the life she had chosen, instead of forcing his emotions into the center of it. Lin Xiaojiao arrived during the argument and openly displayed marks from the previous night, as proof that Zhao could no longer deny their connection. She immediately covered Weiwei's view, dismissing the spectacle as something his pregnant wife did not need to see. Lin Xiaojiao boasted that marriage into Zhao's powerful capital family was still her destiny, regardless of how the relationship began. Weiqi wished them happiness with enough dry humor to make both people understand that she wanted nothing from either of them. Zhao continued protesting that he had been drugged, while Lin Xiaojiao kept using the evidence of the encounter to trap him. Weiwei finally ended the performance by pointing out that she had barely met Zhao and had never encouraged his pursuit. She called his behavior selfish, told Lin Xiaojiao to stop using her as a rival audience, and ordered both of them away. When neither moved fast enough, Weiwei grabbed a broom and physically drove the pair out of the courtyard. Zhao had never seen her that furious, while Lin Xiaojiao received enough dust across the mouth to stop another round of insults. The gate had barely closed when 3 police officers arrived, responding to a report that a woman had been forced at Weiwei's residence. Weiwei immediately redirected them toward Zhao and Lin Xiaojiao, the only 2 people whose overnight scandal could possibly match the complaint. Lin Xiaojiao casually asked the punishment for forcing a woman, and learned that such an offense could carry the death penalty. Her expression changed at once, because destroying Zhao completely would also destroy the marriage and status she still wanted. She grabbed his arm, told police they were lovers planning to marry, and converted a potential criminal case into a humiliating domestic scandal. Zhao looked sickened but understood the threat, identified himself as a cadre school director, and denied knowing who had filed the report. The officers left irritated after concluding they had been pulled into private drama rather than an immediate crime requiring action. Zhao walked away, but Lin Xiaojiao warned that if he failed to formally propose the next day, she could still ruin them both. After he left, she turned toward Weiwei, envy, and instead received congratulations on what Weiwei called a perfectly miserable match. Lin Xiaojiao defended Zhao's rank, claiming his political future made him far more valuable than Shiwan could ever become. Weiwei answered that Shiwan used whatever strength he possessed on his wife, while Zhao now wanted distance from the woman, claiming him. She asked whether Lin Xiaojiao planned to drug Zhao every time affection failed, turning the rival's own method into the obvious weakness. Furious, Lin Xiaojiao shifted back to the textbook contest and promised that taking Weiwei's teaching position would finish the humiliation. Weiwei encouraged her to bring every book, arrive on time, and invite the whole village, which unsettled Lin Xiaojiao more than fear would have. For 3 days, Weiwei had continued teaching normally instead of running door to door, and the rival still could not explain that confidence. At breakfast, the Hua family deliberately avoided discussing Zhao, respecting the fact that Weiwei had already rejected him clearly enough. Shiwan followed his wife into their room afterward and kissed her with unusual intensity, finally releasing anxiety Zhao's obsession had created. Weiwei understood the emotion and reminded her husband that he did not need another man's behavior to measure his place in her life. Then she asked Shiwan for help with the school deadline, converting another romantic moment into practical teamwork. By the time Weiwei reached the Women's Federation, a crowd had already gathered around Lin Xiaojiao's display table. The challenger proudly announced that she had borrowed roughly 100 books and copied additional volumes by hand. Against the other candidates, that collection looked impressive enough to make Lin Xiaojiao declare victory before Weiwei even entered. Parents and children saw Weiwei arrive empty-handed and immediately feared the teacher they trusted had decided to surrender. Several students tugged at her sleeves, begging her not to leave, even if the other woman technically produced more books. Their reaction reminded Weiwei that the competition had already become larger than a salary. The children associated the school itself with her presence. She reassured them without revealing the answer yet, allowing Lin Xiaojiao one final moment to enjoy the victory she believed certain. The rival repeated the original condition publicly, so witnesses could confirm that the teaching position depended on complete textbook sets. That detail would matter, because 100 scattered books were not the same as 37 complete collections across every grade. Weiwei had designed the challenge around completeness, precisely because copying random pages created the appearance of effort without solving the students' actual shortage. Shiwan's role in her plan was simple. Move the duplicated materials from a hidden location at the right time, and make their arrival look ordinary. The treasure pot had already produced enough textbooks, notebooks, and pencils to exceed anything the challengers could assemble manually. Weiwei wanted the reveal to benefit the students immediately, not merely embarrass the women standing beside the table. That meant supplies had to be sorted, distributed, and explained, rather than dumped dramatically into the courtyard for applause. Director Li and Mingju knew Weiwei had promised a solution, but even they had not seen the real quantity waiting nearby. Principal Mang's connection provided a believable educational source, while the Hua family's labor could explain how the boxes physically reached school. The final presentation therefore looked like organized support rather than a supernatural warehouse, opening in front of several villages. Lin Xiaojiao had spent 3 sleepless days trying to prove personal superiority, while Weiwei used the same time to improve infrastructure. The difference would become visible as soon as the first complete sets were placed in front of the students. More importantly, the contest had taught Weiwei how strongly parents valued resources once they believed education could produce real opportunity. That public support would later become important when village leaders began competing to control the school for political prestige. At this moment, however, the crowd only wanted to know whether teacher Weiwei had brought anything at all. Lin Xiaojiao interpreted every second of delay as proof that her rival was finally trapped without another clever escape. Weiwei remained calm because there was no need to argue with someone whose defeat was already packed into boxes. She also knew humiliating Lin Xiaojiao too aggressively could shift sympathy toward the loser. So the students' needs had to remain central. The strongest victory would be one where every witness left talking about new books rather than another fight between 2 women. Shiwan understood that instinct and followed her instructions without turning the delivery into a personal challenge against Zhao or Lin Xiaojiao. Their marriage had become most effective when neither needed to dominate the other's problem. They simply supplied whatever strength the situation required. Weiwei had protected Shiwan politically, Shiwan protected her physically, and the space provided resources neither could obtain through ordinary channels. Together, those layers were transforming a household, sent down under suspicion, into one increasingly difficult for outsiders to isolate. The school contest was about to provide the clearest public proof yet, because the benefit would be visible in every child's hands. Lin Xiaojiao still believed she was fighting for a teacher's chair, unaware that Weiwei had already moved on to building a lasting educational base. With the village watching, all that remained was opening the first box. Lin Xiaojiao told Weiwei to surrender, but the students physically tried to push the rival out, rather than accept losing their teacher. When Lin Xiaojiao raised a hand toward them, Weiwei caught her arm and ordered the children aside, before the contest became dangerous. Then the crowd noticed Shiwan and Sanzi approaching with wheelbarrows buried beneath stacks of textbooks in far better condition than anything displayed. Lin Xiaojiao's confidence collapsed because the volume alone exceeded what every challenger had borrowed and copied across 3 sleepless days. Weiwei invited her to admit defeat without further humiliation, while villagers and students celebrated the arrival of real teaching materials. The duplicated books even preserved useful handwritten notes from the originals, making them more valuable in class than pristine empty copies. Lin Xiaojiao demanded proof they were genuine and explanations for the cost, but Weiwei refused to let a defeated rival investigate her supply chain. She offered one practical choice instead: donate the challenger's collected books to the school, or carry them all back home. When Lin Xiaojiao tried to inspect the new stacks anyway, Shiwan blocked her, and Sanzi kept her hands away from the supplies. The rival changed tactics and loudly calculated that more than 1,000 books could represent a price ordinary village families could never pay. Parents immediately became frightened, with some preparing to withdraw children, rather than accept another expense beyond food and basic household needs. Lin Xiaojiao watched the panic with satisfaction, because even Weiwei's victory looked useless if the school became unaffordable. Weishi stopped the departing families and reminded everyone that she had promised free education from the day the school opened. Tuition remained free, the textbooks were free, and no parent owed a single coin for the materials now filling the courtyard. Relief spread instantly, while Lin Xiaojiao lost control and accused Weiwei of spending impossible personal wealth despite being sent down. She threatened to report the books as suspicious property, not realizing that villagers now saw such a report as an attack on their children's future. Several parents blocked her path, arguing that removing the books would punish students who had done nothing wrong. Lin Zhao tried invoking Zhao Shuya as her future husband, but villagers openly doubted that a respected official would choose someone behaving like this. Her claim became even weaker when Zhao appeared nearby, heard people asking about tomorrow's wedding, and simply turned away without answering. The crowd understood the silence immediately and mocked Lin Xiaojiao's boast until her anger became more painful than the lost teaching job. After she left, Weiwei asked parents for the only payment she wanted: protect the books and spend half an hour reading with their children when possible. The request was so modest that families laughed with relief and agreed before anyone could turn the moment into another argument. Shiwan and Sanzi helped distribute materials until every child had a neat stack covering the subjects needed for regular lessons. Weiwei felt fuller watching those books reach desks than she had felt when the space first produced them secret. Women's Federation workers asked how she obtained so many forcing Weiwei to use the ordinary explanation prepared in advance. She described a generous older acquaintance connected to printing who had supported the rural school after hearing about its shortage. The copied notes appeared so perfectly identical that staff joked Weiwei's luck deserved a story of its own. Their acceptance relieved her because the treasure pot remained useful only as long as nobody demanded to see how duplication actually happened. Director Li watched from outside with quiet pride, her earlier distance toward Weiwei replaced by genuine concern and growing trust. Weiwei credited Principal Mang with helping her find the solution and mentioned the meal she had promised him in return. Director Li immediately rejected any plan involving Mang or the gatekeeper Old Chen and warned Weiwei against dealing with either man secretly. Beneath the anger, she advised Weiwei to protect herself from hidden betrayal, even when people appeared generous and useful. The warning sounded personal rather than abstract, confirming that Director Li's hostility came from an old wound, still powerful enough to shape present decisions. Weiwei accepted the boundary and returned to teaching, where having textbooks immediately improved lesson flow and student confidence. Near dismissal, shouting outside interrupted class, as Principal Mang and Old Chen arrived carrying chickens, rice, oil, notebooks, and pens for the school. Their good intentions created exactly the disaster Weiwei hoped to avoid, because Director Li refused even to unlock the gate. She called both men unwelcome and would not accept a single gift, while they stood outside looking more guilty than offended. Weiwei realized the problem had nothing to do with ordinary workplace irritation and could not be solved by forcing everyone into one conversation. Later, after leaving Director Li's home, she found Mang and Old Chen waiting nearby for any information about the older woman's condition. Weiwei finally demanded the history, and Princess explained that he and Director Li had fallen in love while serving in the military. After the war, Mang rejected an arranged marriage selected by his family and left home rather than surrender the woman he wanted. During his absence, relatives brought the arranged bride into his household anyway, creating the appearance that he had chosen family expectations over Director Li. Mang suspected someone had delivered that version of events to her, but even he admitted it seemed too simple to explain 20 years of hatred. Weiwei agreed, because Director Li was not the type to disappear quietly over a rumor she could have confronted directly. Old Chen revealed that Meng had remained alone for 2 decades, which made the unresolved misunderstanding even more tragic if neither side knew the full story. Weiwei offered to learn what truly happened, but warned both men not to treat her concern as permission to push marriage immediately. Director Li's chest had already hurt from anger that day, and emotional pressure could become physically dangerous if they moved recklessly. Mixa accepted the warning and promised that regardless of the outcome, Weiwei could consider him a friend willing to help when needed. Weiwei made one condition clear: if she discovered Mang had genuinely wronged Director Li, she would stop helping him without hesitation. She then took ribs, fine rice, potatoes, and small cabbages from her space in a private place before returning to Director Li. Max and Old Chen remained outside, asking only to learn later whether the woman had eaten and whether a doctor might be necessary. Weiwei entered with a cheerful tone and treated Director Li less like a superior than an older relative who needed food and rest. Director Li immediately tried to send the meat home, insisting Weiwei's elderly in-laws deserved rare nutrition more than she did. That instinct touched Weiwei, because even while angry and unwell, the older woman was still thinking about someone else's household. Weiwei claimed Mother Hua had specifically sent the ribs, then began cooking before Director Li could continue refusing. Meat was expensive enough that half a jin of ribs felt extravagant, especially in a region where potatoes appeared in nearly every meal. Weiwei rendered the fat, seasoned the meat, added potatoes, and prepared rice porridge with cabbage until the tiny room smelled completely different. Director Li tried not to show hunger, but the aroma exposed how long it had been since she enjoyed a proper meat dish. While checking her temperature, Weiwei was surprised when Director Li quietly asked whether she considered the older woman beautiful. Weifei answered seriously that her strong brows, large eyes, and confident presence made her striking rather than delicate. Director Li then revealed why the question mattered. She sometimes imagined the daughter she lost would have grown into someone much like Weiwei. The child had been Principal Mang's, and Director Li believed he had rejected both mother and baby when he chose another woman. Weiwei immediately suspected a misunderstanding, but Director Li insisted she had personally witnessed enough to destroy any softer explanation. Her anger triggered another pain in her chest, so Weiwei stopped pressing and served the meal before curiosity became cruelty. Director Li owned only one proper bowl and one set of utensils, yet she gave them to Weiwei and used a water ladle herself. When Weiwei tried to refuse, the older woman said cooking for someone and then refusing to eat together would hurt more than sharing scarce food. They finally sat down alone, and the simple meal created the first space where Director Li seemed willing to speak without to have authority as armor. Weiwei eventually asked how the pregnancy ended, careful to let the older woman decide whether the story should continue. Director Li explained that after believing Mang had betrayed her, she left immediately and traveled alone toward her hometown. Long-distance travel in that period meant hunger, exhaustion, and uncertainty, and she did not initially realize a missed period meant pregnancy. By the time the truth became clear, she had already endured conditions dangerous for both mother and child. The memory explained why Mang's sudden appearance, decades later, felt less like romance returning and more like someone reopening a grave. Weiwei understood that proving he never intended betrayal would not automatically erase what Director Li physically suffered afterward. Any reconciliation would therefore need truth first, accountability second, and only then the possibility of companionship if both people still wanted it. That perspective kept Weiwei from becoming an enthusiastic matchmaker simply because two lonely adults once loved each other. She cared more about protecting Director Lee from another wound than satisfying Mang's hope after 20 years. At the same time, the incomplete story bothered her because one false message could have destroyed a family before either side understood what happened. Weiwei had already seen how manipulated information nearly destroyed her own marriage during the forced divorce scheme. That parallel made her especially sensitive to the possibility that director Lee and Mang had been separated by someone else's agenda. The supporting character handbook might eventually clarify the matter, but Weiwei preferred evidence from living people over treating system information as absolute truth. For now, she listened, fed the woman who had become her ally, and let the old pain emerge at Director Lee's pace. Outside Sin, the school Weiwei built had survived its first leadership challenge, and now possessed books no rural classroom nearby could match. Inside, another relationship damaged by history was finally being examined, instead of simply endured. Director Lee finally described the moment that had destroyed her trust. She returned unexpectedly and found Mong lying beside another woman. No rumor had carried that image to her, so telling herself it was merely gossip had never been enough to quiet the betrayal. She left before demanding explanations, believing the man she loved had chosen the arranged bride his family wanted after all, without staying to hear a defense. During the exhausting journey away, Director Lee climbed a ladder while weak and distracted, then fell hard enough to lose the child. The physical loss transformed heartbreak into something permanent, and decades later, Mang's name still carried the memory of that unborn daughter. Weiwei could not erase such pain with one clever theory, but the details made the old story feel increasingly manipulated. Before she could press further, thunder rolled over the village, and a sudden downpour turned the road outside into running mud. Principal Mang appeared through the rain carrying an umbrella, unable to stay away after hearing Director C had suffered chest pain during their earlier confrontation. Director Lee's expression hardened immediately, yet Weiwei refused to let either adults escape before the contradiction between their memories was examined. Mang admitted the woman had indeed been found in his room, then insisted he had never invited her there or agreed to marry her. He remembered returning from ancestral rites unusually exhausted, falling into a deep sleep, and waking only after everything had already been arranged. Director Lee remembered being brought to that room at exactly the right moment to see the scene before anyone offered an explanation. Those two details fit too neatly together, and Weiwei asked whether Mang's family had prepared incense or medicine before he became drowsy. Mang went silent because the ancestral incense had been handled by relatives who were openly desperate to force the arranged marriage. He finally understood that sleep, the woman in his bed, and Director Lee's perfectly timed arrival could have belonged to one plan. That possibility did not make Director Lee forgive him, because his family's scheme had still destroyed her pregnancy and 20 years of life. Mang did not demand forgiveness either. He apologized for failing to protect her and promised to search for proof instead of arguing. Weiwei respected that answer more than another declaration of love, because truth could be investigated, while old suffering could not be talked away. Mang left into the rain with old Shen, determined to trace relatives, witnesses, and anything surviving from the night that separated them. Director Lee remained shaken after the confrontation, but for the first time her certainty about deliberate betrayal had developed a visible crack. Weiwei stayed until the older woman's breathing settled, then started home with Shiwan once the storm weakened enough for safe travel. The road was slick and nearly empty when they spotted a man collapsed beside a bicycle, loaded with soaked mailbags. Shiwan checked him first and found a pulse, while Weiwei helped move the unconscious carrier away from roadside water and gathered the fallen bicycle mailbags. Leaving him there could have turned a fever into death, so they brought both the man and his scattered letters back home. Mother Hua prepared a warm place while Weiwei separated wet envelopes, carefully drying each one so strangers would not lose messages entrusted to the carrier. A doctor confirmed exhaustion and fever, rather than a grave injury, which relieved the household after the dangerous-looking discovery. Most letters meant nothing to the Hua family, but one damaged envelope carried a strange name that immediately changed Father Hua's expression. The usually composed older man took that letter with trembling hands and withdrew before anyone could ask why it mattered, while Mother Hua also became visibly emotional. Mother Hua became emotional too, and Shiwan recognized the reaction as something connected to the older brother, who had disappeared years earlier. Weiwei remembered the family history she had only recently learned: a battlefield disappearance, a vanished sister-in-law, and investigations that repeatedly harmed those left behind. Her secret space offered information on supporting characters, so the obvious temptation was to ask whether Shiwan's missing brother was still alive. Once inside that night, Weiwei turned to the little television and tried to use its cross-space knowledge for a direct life-or-death answer. The assistant refused immediately, explaining that certain information concerning a person's life or death could not be safely revealed through that function. It warned that forcing such knowledge could even erase access entirely, making curiosity far more dangerous than simply waiting for evidence. Weiwei backed off because losing the space's tools over one forbidden question would endanger every plan she had already built around them. She checked the supporting character handbook instead, but Shiwan's missing brother did not appear there in any useful way. The absence was frustrating rather than conclusive, since the handbook cataloged people tied to particular story conflicts instead of everyone in the world. While searching, Weiwei noticed Lin Shujiao's profile had changed in one place that made even less sense than the missing brother. The husband listed beside the rival's name was Su Wangkai, not Zhao Shuya, despite Lin Zhao loudly claiming Zhao as her intended partner. That contradiction suggested the rival's future had already diverged from what she wanted, but Weiwei could not yet see how the change would happen. The little television reminded her that the monthly lottery was still available, preventing her from spending the entire night staring at one confusing line. Weiwei drew a dream card, the same strange type of reward that had previously shown information impossible to obtain through ordinary investigation. Remembering the last dream made her uneasy, because useful knowledge from the space rarely arrived, without forcing her to witness something painful. Before leaving, she checked the future watermelon seeds planted in Easy Grow and found the vines had already reached the flowering stage. Their cycle was slower than the miraculous potatoes, yet the speed still proved the black soil could accelerate valuable crops far beyond normal farming. Back in bed, Shiwan sensed that Weiwei was troubled, but respected her silence rather than demanding access to every secret inside her space. That trust mattered more after the divorce scheme, because their marriage now worked through shared loyalty instead of constant explanations. Sometime after midnight, the dream card activated and dragged Weiwei into a scene she could neither control nor leave, more like recovered memory than ordinary sleep. A young woman in a white dress stood crying before uniformed men who apologized for failing to recover Huang Qin after a catastrophic landslide. They believed his body had been buried, but the woman refused to accept his death without seeing him herself. The dream shifted to Mother Hua, carrying a baby toward a spotless room whose emptiness revealed that the young woman had disappeared too. A teenage Shiwan caught his panicked mother as she rushed home, while Father Hua immediately ran out to search for the missing daughter-in-law. Then Weiwei watched the woman walk alone toward the ocean, grief pulling her deeper until a wave swallowed the white dress completely. Trapped inside the vision, Weiwei screamed without sound, because she could observe the past, but could not change one movement within it. Just when the dream seemed to confirm another death, the scene spun, and the same woman appeared alive on a crowded modern street. Her clothes had changed, cars surrounded her, and fluent English filled the air, proving she had survived and reached somewhere far from home. Relief broke the dream's grip so violently that Weiwei woke crying in Shiwan's arms, exhausted as if she had actually fought the ocean. Shiwan was already preparing to carry her to a doctor, and the sight of him made Weiwei cling to his neck before she could explain. Once her breathing steadied, she gave him the one fact that mattered most. His sister-in-law was alive. Hope flashed across Shiwan's face, followed immediately by questions about where she was, and whether his missing brother had appeared beside her. Weiwei hesitated because the foreign street turned good news into politically dangerous information for a family already living under suspicion. She finally said only that his sister-in-law appeared to be abroad, and Shiwan understood why the answer could never leave their room. In the current climate, one careless rumor about overseas connections could destroy the safety their entire countryside exile was meant to protect. Shiwan did not press for details she could not safely provide. He simply promised to protect the secret until real evidence appeared. The next morning, the rescued mail carrier was awake and strong enough to eat breakfast with the family. Before continuing his route, Weiwei returned his letters dried and organized, which moved him, because every envelope represented someone waiting far away for news. The carrier introduced himself as Muin Yun and promised the Hua family help if they ever needed it after saving both him and his mail. Sanzi walked him out after breakfast, deliberately giving the rest of the household privacy once. Father Hua announced he had something important to reveal. The strange letter from the previous night was indeed connected to Shiwan's missing older brother, and Father Hua had recognized the coded sender immediately. Shiwan rose so quickly his chair nearly overturned, joy appearing before he noticed Mother Hua wiping tears beside the table. Father Hua handed him the short message, which said the older brother's wife was pregnant and had been safely sent away, while her husband remained behind. The older brother himself could not return yet, but he hoped one day to reunite with his parents and younger brothers. Shiwan realized his father had known far more than the family was allowed to discuss, including the true reason. Both missing relatives vanished. Father Hua explained that the mission was top secret, known to him and only the necessary people above him in the organization. That secrecy also explained why ordinary investigations kept producing danger. Anyone watching the family needed to believe the disappearance was unresolved. Shiwan asked the harder question next. If senior leadership knew the truth, why had the innocent Hua household still been sent away? Father Hua answered that remaining in the capital would have attracted exactly the scrutiny their absent relatives could not afford. Two missing family members and Mother Hua's sensitive background created the perfect target for enemy agents, political suspicion, or accidental exposure during a dangerous period. Relocating the family to the northeast reduced that pressure, while giving Shiwan a place where he could build a life outside the capital's attention. His older brother had even written that the Northeast held opportunity and hoped the younger generation could create something meaningful there. If the mission succeeded, Father Hua believed they could eventually return together with honor. Until then, survival required patience and silence. Shiwan answered that the family would return together, refusing to speak as though failure or permanent separation were already decided. For Weiwei, the revelation transformed their countryside exile from a sentence meant to destroy them into a protected waiting ground with a future. Father Hua apologized for the sudden orders that had pulled Weiwei into the family's dangerous situation before anyone could explain what marriage might cost her. Shiwan immediately moved between them, unwilling to entertain even the idea that his wife would have been better off outside his life. His father laughed and teased that both Hua's sons had somehow become men who treated their wives as the center of the household. Shiwan could face officials without blinking, yet a joke from his parents about loving Weiwei was enough to turn his ears bright red. On the walk to work, Weiwei teased him about the earlier divorce proposal, and he declared that any man foolish enough to leave her deserved a beating. Beneath the joke sat a real promise. Whatever political pressure returned, Shiwan would not trade his marriage for an easier personal future. Weiwei answered by shifting toward the future they could actually build, beginning with better crops after the coming winter. The Northeast possessed deep black soil, and her future seeds could turn that natural advantage into reliable food beyond grain payments. Once spring planting returned. For a couple, once treated like people being discarded into the countryside, producing their own surplus would mean independence rather than mere survival. The village was already thinking about food because the autumn soybean harvest had begun and every available hand was being pulled into the fields. Parents asked permission for older children to miss school temporarily so they could collect beans and prevent precious grain from being wasted. Weiwei accepted the reality instead of treating attendance like a city classroom rule, leaving only the youngest children with Mingju that day. She then joined the harvest herself, determined to understand the physical work, supporting every family she intended to help educate. Her soft hands and lack of technique became obvious within minutes, as experienced villagers cut long soybean rows with smooth, economical strokes. Weiwei struggled through a fraction of the distance, fighting tough, prickly soybean stalks while experienced villagers moved efficiently across rows stretching far beyond her. Mingju had warned her this would happen, but embarrassment only made Weiwei more determined to learn instead of retreating to easier work. By noon, she had discovered the proper cutting motion and improved enough to contribute, even though veteran farmers remained far faster. The experience gave her a practical lesson no book could provide about how much labor stood behind every bowl of grain. After eating with the younger children, Weiwei headed back toward the fields and noticed a wedding procession moving through the village road. She would have ignored it completely if one of the Lin relatives had not stopped to boast that Lin Xiaojiao was marrying into wealth. By rural standards, the Su household looked impressive because it owned dozens of chickens, pigs, and enough property to make neighbors envious. Weiwei found the boast almost funny, especially coming from someone whose formerly privileged family now measured status by another household's livestock. The exchange ended when Shiwan approached, and the other man abandoned his threatening posture rather than risk confronting Weiwei's husband. Shiwan was more interested in Weiwei's hands than the wedding, and immediately noticed two clear blisters raised across her palm. She tried calling the blisters harmless, but Shiwan refused to let stubbornness turn a small harvest injury into infected skin covered with field dirt and sweat. He took her home for medicine, joking that their household needed only one skilled farm worker, because Weiwei's job was learning to order him around. On the way back, shouting erupted near the small river upstream from the fish pond, where villagers were suddenly diving into the water. The new bride had jumped into the river before the wedding could settle into celebration, and the crowd dragged Lin Xiaojiao back onto the bank. For several frightening moments, she lay unresponsive, while the groom's mother cursed the marriage, and villagers argued that the woman might be dying. Then Lin Xiaojiao coughed up water, grabbed the nearest people, and announced that she would rather risk death than marry Su Wangkai. She accused her parents of drugging her and forcing the ceremony, because they had already accepted money from the Su family. More explosively, she declared that Zhao Shuya was the man she truly loved and claimed she could not betray him by becoming another man's wife. The riverbank went silent because forced marriage carried legal consequences, while her supposed relationship with a cadre official made the scandal even larger. Villagers ran for the chief, the Women's Federation, and the police as different families began shouting incompatible versions of what had happened. Su, Wangkai's mother, insisted Zhao wanted nothing to do with Lin Xiaojiao and had been relieved to see the troublesome woman married elsewhere. Lin Xiaojiao retaliated by insulting Su Wangkai's intelligence and saying she would never willingly spend her life producing children with him. The groom's mother lunged at her, but neighbors held both women apart before the failed wedding became a public beating. Lin Xiaojiao recognized that chaos gave her one remaining weapon: expose every private bargain loudly enough that nobody could bury the story. She claimed the Lin parents had taken 300 yuan in bride money, spent it, then trapped her because they could not repay the debt. According to her, she had personally provided another 300 yuan to cancel the match, only for her parents to keep that money too. The groom's mother confirmed the original bride payment while calling the rest lies, accidentally strengthening the claim that money had driven the marriage. Every angry sentence revealed another damaging detail about the Lin parents, Su household, and the relationship Lin Xiaojiao claimed with Zhao. Weiwei watched without joining the fight, because the handbook had already predicted Su Wangkai as the rival's husband, making the failed ceremony strangely significant. She also understood that Lin Xiaojiao was not confessing out of honesty. The reborn woman was destroying every alliance she could no longer control. When police arrived, they recognized Lin Xiaojiao from the earlier incident where she had publicly clung to Zhao and presented herself as his partner. Her story about being drugged and forced into marriage therefore sounded plausible enough that officers immediately agreed to investigate. They took Lin Xiaojiao and the groom's mother away, while the village chief followed, leaving the processions scattered behind them. As the group passed Weiwei's home, Lin Xiaojiao tried to speak toward her, but Shiwan pulled Weiwei through the gate and shut it. Neither spouse discussed the rival afterward, because they had no reason to let someone else's collapsing schemes occupy the center of their marriage. Shiwan returned to the problem he could actually solve and sat Weiwei down beside the medicine box to treat her harvest blisters. He heated a sewing needle over the lamp, then distracted her by suddenly asking whether she had imagined their unborn baby as a boy or girl. What? She barely noticed it when he quickly opened the first blister before she could tense against the pain. She realized the trick too late and protested, while Shiwan argued that 1 second of surprise was kinder than several minutes of fearful anticipation. He cleaned the wound, blew gently across her palm, and asked about the baby again, with enough innocence to make her suspicious. This time she watched his visible needle carefully, only to discover he had concealed another one and treated the second blister while she guarded the wrong hand. Annoyed but laughing, Weiwei accepted the bandages and repeated that either a son or daughter would be welcome, as long as the child was healthy. The exchange made their future feel tangible. Not abstract wealth, but protected growing inside a household that had chosen one another. Shiwan ordered her to stay away from fieldwork, yet Weiwei refused because quitting after one morning would separate her from villagers carrying the full harvest burden. He compromised by accompanying her and keeping her near the field edge, where she could help without reopening the bandaged skin. More workers arrived that afternoon, including cadre school staff and elderly residents. After the village chief warned that colder weather could arrive quickly, Weiwei looked at the warm September sun skeptically. But everyone around her understood how abruptly northeastern temperatures could change. The chief recognized her as the Chen family's long-lost daughter and mentioned that Director Li's support had already made Weiwei important to local affairs. His comments hinted that her birth family might approach again, though Weiwei had no interest in guessing what favor could suddenly make relatives attentive. That answer arrived the same evening, when another Chen brother and his pregnant wife appeared at the Hua gate, carrying gifts and unusually sweet smiles. Their friendliness contrasted so sharply with earlier cold treatment that Weiwei and Shiwan immediately understood. The visit had a purpose beyond reconciliation or renewed family affection. The sister-in-law tried handing over heavy bags and subtly invoked her pregnancy, but Shiwan said her own husband should carry anything burdensome. He also refused unearned presents, and Weiwei noticed that 2 items were gifts she herself had previously brought to the Chen household. Rejecting her own presents turned the apology into something almost insulting, so Weiwei asked them to state the real request directly. When the sister-in-law called it a simple family visit, Weiwei reminded her that affection had never existed strongly enough between them for casual visits. The woman's politeness disappeared almost immediately, and Weiwei overheard her complaining that a poor relative had become too difficult to flatter and unwilling to give face. Weiwei answered that poverty was not shameful, but cruelty and a poisonous tongue were excellent reasons to keep someone outside the gate. Her brother tried defending his wife, revealing an honest man so devoted to his marriage that he ignored how badly his spouse treated everyone else. Weiwei told him his wife's happiness was his responsibility, not a debt that could be transferred onto a sister he had barely known. The sister-in-law then attacked the entire Chen family, claiming the brother was neglected by parents, siblings, and even the long-lost daughter they celebrated finding. Instead of recognizing the manipulation, the brother became desperate and explained that his city-born wife had sacrificed by marrying a rural man. He believed a coming policy might let educated youth return to the city, creating the possibility of restoring the life she had once expected. When Weiwei asked whether he would be allowed to return with her, his wife looked away, yet he continued begging on her behalf. That response revealed the imbalance clearly. He was willing to risk family relationships for a future his wife had not promised to share with him. Weiwei refused to help until her brother finally dropped to his knees and exposed the real bargain behind the visit. Durong village's chief had promised to recommend his wife for a future return if the Chen family convinced Weiwei to relocate the new school. The request stunned Weiwei because the school belonged to the Women's Federation and was created for children from 3 villages, not one clan. Choosing Darong would improve one relative's chances while making Weiwei responsible for shared institutions away from neighboring families. Her brother admitted. He understood that risk, proving his wife's possible city return, had become more important to him than Weiwei's safety and reputation. Weiwei refused the bargain because relatives who had never protected her could not demand that she create enemies merely to improve one woman's prospects. Her brother tried following her inside, but Shiwan lifted him from his knees and stopped the performance before guilt could become another form of pressure. Shiwan reminded him that the Chen family had barely visited Weiwei since she arrived. Yet now someone appeared the moment her influence became useful. A marriage could inspire loyalty, he said, but no husband had the right to purchase his wife's future with another woman's risk. Sanzi joined them at the gate, making it clear Weiwei already had parents, brothers, and a household ready to defend her without demanding payment. Faced with united resistance, the sister-in-law collected the rejected gifts and walked away angrily, forcing her husband to chase after her. Mother Hua worried that the encounter might hurt Weiwei, but her daughter-in-law had already learned not to confuse blood relation with earned trust. She valued the Chen parents who had supported her sincerely, yet refused to let one selfish branch of the family control her decisions. Once the house quieted, Shiwan asked the question that mattered more than the failed manipulation. Why did Durong suddenly want the school relocated? Nobody had fought for ownership when Weiwei struggled to open the classroom, collect supplies, recruit help, and convince families education was worth the effort. Now that the school had books, free tuition, growing enrollment, and visible support from the Women's Federation, the same institution had become politically valuable. Weiwei suspected prestige rather than concern for children, but she refused to move before learning what the other villages were actually planning. Her response was practical, rather than fearful. Cook dinner, continue teaching, and deal with each new demand only when it reached their gate. Shiwan admired that steadiness because Weiwei had stopped allowing distant threats to consume energy needed for the home directly in front of her. They had barely entered the kitchen when another visitor called from outside, asking whether the house belonged to the teacher running the new school. A middle-aged village chief stood there in blue work clothes with a live chicken, offering politeness and a gift before explaining his purpose. He represented the third village served by the Women's Federation, which meant Durong was not the only place suddenly interested in controlling Weiwei's school. Shiwan greeted him respectfully, but did not open the gate wider, signaling that gifts and official status would not automatically purchase access to the family. The chief eventually stopped circling the subject and admitted that county leaders had recently heard about the school and responded with unusual approval. Once higher officials asked which village could claim it, all three local chiefs recognized the school as a source of reputation and future favor. His village had prepared an empty compound large enough for classrooms and even offered the Hua family a better house if Weiwei relocated everything there. The generous proposal confirmed Weiwei's suspicion. The school had become valuable only after county leaders noticed it and asked which village could claim the achievement. She answered that the Women's Federation had supported the project when it was difficult, so abandoning that shared structure for new benefits would be ungrateful. More importantly, children from all three villages deserved equal access, and changing the address for one chief's prestige would betray the school's original purpose. The chief asked her to inspect the proposed compound before refusing, but Weiwei declined because a nicer building did not solve the ethical problem. His friendliness weakened as he emphasized that the Hua family remained outsiders without deep local roots and might benefit from choosing stronger village protection. Weiwei heard the pressure beneath the offer and replied that her teaching would remain equally serious for every child, rather than rewarding one village chief's pressure. When persuasion failed, the chief looked toward their comfortable house and suggested that people sent down to the countryside did not usually receive such conditions. The implication was clear: cooperate with him, or questions might begin appearing about how the Hua family obtained its home and belongings. Shiwan proposed bringing the current village chief into the conversation, so every accusation and offer could be discussed openly instead of whispered at a gate. The visitor rejected that idea and warned that the quieter chief protecting their present village would not shield them if political trouble arrived. Weiwei remained calm and said anyone planning to manufacture accusations against the family should think carefully, because a dishonest report could expose the person creating it. Her refusal finally stripped away the last layer of courtesy, and the chief threatened to report their living conditions directly to county authorities. Before Weiwei or Shiwan could answer, Father Hua walked out with a severity his children rarely saw at home. He normally allowed the younger couple to manage household decisions, but a grown official threatening them on their doorstep crossed a line he would not ignore. Father Hua invited the chief to file whatever report he wanted, then warned him to make certain the complaint did not expose his own misconduct. The chief accused the family of rejecting an easy favor, only to invite harsher consequences, expecting the older man to retreat under official pressure. Instead, Father Hua reminded him that this household had survived battlefields and political storms far more serious than one village chief's anger. Weiwei had built the school without demanding personal profit, while none of the chiefs now fighting over it had contributed when the work was difficult. Claiming the finished institution for prestige was not public service, and Father Hua refused to someone disguise opportunism as concern for the community. His defense surprised Weiwei because the dignified older man usually spoke little, yet every sentence made the chief's threats sound smaller. With no useful answer left, the visitor departed angrily and promised that the family would eventually understand the mistake they were making. Weiwei and Shiwan watched him leave, then turned toward Father Hua with expressions that made the older soldier unexpectedly self-conscious. He cleared his throat and asked whether they knew the county leader, whom the chief kept invoking, as though his name could frighten everyone. Neither did, because the couple had spent their energy building a household and school rather than collecting connections among distant officials. Father Hua then revealed that the county leader had once served as a soldier directly under his command, when he was still a squad leader. The information reframed the threat immediately. The official being used to intimidate them was not some unknown power disconnected from the Hua family's past. Father Hua added that their placement in this particular region had never been random. Tying the countryside relocation to relationships, the younger generation barely understood. The deeper arrangement behind their relocation remained unresolved at that point, even after Father Hua revealed that the county connection reached into his own military past. Even without the missing explanation, Weiwei's position had changed dramatically from the woman. Others expected to break after being sent away. She had defended her marriage when officials tried to separate it, exposed the scheme behind that pressure, and brought Shiwan home from confinement. Her rebirth let her recognize dangers she once missed, while the secret space supplied tools that turned knowledge into practical protection. Before consequences became irreversible, the supporting character handbook exposed hostile faults, but Weiwei still verified what she could. Instead of blindly treating every system page as destiny, the treasure pot transformed one borrowed textbook, set into enough materials for a rural school, without forcing poor parents into debt. Easy Grow proved that crops could mature at impossible speed inside the space, while selected seeds could carry valuable traits into ordinary farmland. Future vegetables, potatoes, watermelon, and other varieties, therefore represented more than private food. They offered a path towards stronger harvests, better household reserves, and eventual surplus after winter. The little television's trading functions expanded that possibility further, connecting Weiwei's isolated countryside, home to resources from spaces and eras nobody around her could reach. Yet none of those advantages mattered alone, because every major success still depended on choices made outside the hidden world. Weiwei needed Shiwan's loyalty when divorce became convenient, Mother Hua's courage when officials entered the home, and family support when public pressure escalated. She needed Director Li's trust to build the school, villagers willing to send their children, and students who valued books enough to protect them. Even the harvest taught her that future agricultural knowledge meant little without understanding the labor and timing of people working the actual fields. Her strongest progress, therefore, came from combining extraordinary tools with ordinary relationships, rather than hiding inside the space and solving everything alone. Shiwan had become the husband she could trust with secrets, plans, farming experiments, and the vulnerable hope of raising their child together. Their unborn baby gave every decision a more concrete purpose: food security, a stable home, education, and enough resources to survive political changes. Mother Hua and Father Hua were no longer merely relatives attached to a marriage. They had become parents who defended Weiwei as one of their own. Sanzi treated her like a sister, while the Chen relatives who truly cared had shown that biological family could still be meaningful without controlling her. Director Li had moved from cautious official to trusted elder, and Weiwei's school had become a place children defended because it changed their daily lives. Principal Mang's unresolved history showed that rebuilding a life also meant confronting old wounds carefully, instead of pretending prosperity could erase emotional damage. The secret mission surrounding Shiwan's older brother explained why the Hua family accepted exile so quietly and why returning home could not be rushed. For now, the Northeast was not a temporary punishment to endure with folded hands. It was the only place where the family could safely build. That made Weiwei's farming plans, livestock, school, duplicated supplies, and household improvements parts of one larger strategy for independence. Weiwei had not built a wealthy empire yet. The fields, school, and household security around her were still foundations rather than a finished achievement. What she possessed was more important for the current moment: land, knowledge, hidden resources, trustworthy allies, and a husband determined to stay. The coming winter would test those foundations, but the family already had better food reserves and plans for stronger seeds. When planting season returned, after winter, every improved crop could reduce dependence on scarce markets and create surplus beyond what the household needed for immediate survival. Every educated child also expanded something money could not measure, turning a neglected rural school into an asset. 3 villages now competed to claim after county leaders noticed its success. The irony was clear. The countryside, chosen to isolate this family, was steadily becoming the place where Weiwei accumulated her greatest leverage. Rivals could attack her reputation, officials could pressure her marriage, and relatives could ask selfish favors. But each conflict now met a stronger network. Rebirth gave Weiwei another chance. Yet this life was not improving, because fate automatically rewarded her for returning. It improved because she used remembered mistakes, new information, and every strange space reward to make different decisions. before disaster became irreversible. Shiwan's hand remained beside hers through those decisions, turning the husband she found in exile into the partner around whom her second life could grow. Their child represented the future neither had possessed when political upheaval first pushed the Hua family away from the capital and made stability feel impossible. Their school represented community, their seeds represented food, and their hidden resources represented options when ordinary channels failed. Together, those foundations were already worth more than the status Weiwei had lost, because they could keep producing security instead of merely displaying it. The final unresolved threat came from village leaders competing over her success. But Father Hua's last revelation showed the family was not as isolated as outsiders assumed. Weiwei ended this part still in the countryside, pregnant, married, teaching, planning better harvests, and refusing to let anyone turn her work into their property. What began as exile had become the foundation for a family, a livelihood, and the prosperous future Weiwei intended to build steadily with Shiwan and their child.